you probably don't necessarily have it all in one central location. And I know some of you are accessing it online and writing things. So with that, please just know that we'll be making reference to this. You shouldn't necessarily need, we don't have anything electronic for you today. So we'll be working a lot out of this notebook. If you're curious where this goes, this would go in the tab that's called Recommendation. It's the new addition to the Recommendation section. They did, but we'll talk a little bit about why it's an empty section. So with that, I want to do a few introductions, and then I'm going to turn it over. So we'll start over here. Today we have 4 people that are special guests with us today in representation of the Long Range Facility Planning Committee. So first we have Steve Phipps, who's one of our community members that was and has graciously served to be a representative today on behalf of the entire committee. One of the last functions the team did was nominate some people to be their representatives. So these 2 lucky gentlemen here drew the short straw in some ways. But and then Greg Rathbun is the other community representative, and they've both been very active participants with the committee work. And I certainly I know you'll help me in thanking them for their volunteer work to this big task. On the other side of the table here, we have our 2 of our 3 facilitators that have facilitated the process. So Doug Nichols is each of you met them when they were at the meeting, so it's not necessarily a new introduction, but he brought a lot of expertise to the process. And then our main facilitator is Phil Crocker, and he's sitting next to Eric here, and he actually is going to kick off this whole next section. So before we dive in and get to turn over, is there anything that you're missing or that you need or that is unclear about what to do with all these papers? And I also will encourage you that today, the purpose of a study session is to do just that, is to study, it's to discuss, it's to ask questions, it's to process information, it's to get clarity around topics. This really isn't, and when you get to my part, you're going to understand that there's some legal reasons why this is not a decision-making day. It's a processing and discussion. It's defined in RCW. But I hope that you are open today to some real deep dialogue with this, and I think we've got the right people sitting at the table that represent both, obviously all of you are here, but representing the committee as well. So I'm good with that. Phil's a little angry with me because he didn't know that he's just, but I gave him the computer and the mouse and everything, so there you go.
Guess there's a reason I'm sitting here between my 2.
Yeah.
You didn't duck.
I thought I was coming from all support. No, it's fine. Thank you for having us, and we're really excited. And I want to especially thank Greg and Steve. Doug and I have been doing this a long time, and there's a lot of similarities between districts, even though each one's unique. And we kind of tend to know what we're doing. And I will say comfortably that the recommendations from the committee are better than if we had done it on our own. Absolutely. And Steve and Greg both were real drivers in that committee to raise real hard questions and even propose some good solutions that, and we drove to, I think, full agreement by the committee on everything. Sometimes it took a while, but we got full agreement. So these gentlemen really helped drive what you're going to see today. I would encourage you to, as you ask questions about process, which we focus on process a lot, or outcomes, or even some of the data that you ask them. They're now experts in facility planning with their 15-some hours sitting with us. And they know the answers as well as some of the questions that we couldn't answer. So thank you guys again. I think it's always great to have some folks there. Doug, anything before we get started?
Nothing to add.
Okay.
And also, Jeremy Betts, who's holding up the back row, was also part of the committee. He elected to sit back there instead. If you're curious, the makeup of the whole committee is on the back of the binder too, of everyone who, we did lose a member because was with us in the beginning and then just didn't come back. So his name's not on this, but the rest of the regular participants are on the list.
Thank you. And Jeremy was also helpful because we did a lot of conversations around educational processes and programming at the beginning, just to set the stage with data and educational programming. And Jeremy was helpful in helping some of the committee members understand the educational pieces that they weren't in the business. So That was great, so thank you. All right, the PowerPoint is basically stepping you through the recommendation document. So we'll go through it, and I would say, since, let's not stand on formality. If you have questions as we go through, I'm comfortable saying hold on to it. We're going to get to it in a couple slides, or we can attack it right there, whichever you prefer. Does that sound all right? Okay. So first, a little bit of review and context. And we brought this up with the committee in every meeting to continue to ground us. So this is the context and purpose of the committee. And it was important in the latter meetings that we held to our context, because this is a multidimensional challenge, getting through it, planning. And we had to put some things in parking lots, such as educational programming, such as site selection, things that weren't part of what the community needed to look at. So it was helpful to have our context and purpose in front of us to help ground us and keep us on our path. The committee members, which Josh has two on the back of your binder. Here's the 6 committee. And meeting 6 was the final development of a recommendation to the board. There were no meeting notes out of that meeting because we dealt with a draft document, and the changes we made are represented in the final document that was sent out to the committee in 2 electronic waves. The first solicited 3 pieces of feedback that we felt that we incorporated, and they were good, and we wanted to get everybody's eyes on one more time. And I believe we didn't hear anything. We said, only send back if you have concerns, so we have unanimous agreement from the committee on those. So that's why there's no meeting notes from meeting 6. They are the recommendation document. The planning process, we walked through, and each of you have been to a meeting, so you've seen these slides when you've been to a meeting, but the planning process we laid out, is fairly straightforward, and the unique opportunity in Moses Lake was that you already had bond capacity. Most folks are heading in that direction, and they're trying to tee themselves up and start working with bond council. So you guys, that's why we circled number 3, and you don't need a bond plan. What you needed was how best to execute the plan that the voters approved. So that was what we focused on. The committee's goals. These were the goals agreed upon and given to the committee. The key upon it was at the first committee meeting, we had heard both from staff and from committee members that there was some concern over agreed upon data sets. And we're not going to get very far if everybody doesn't agree on the data. So we spent, I would say, a good portion of the first 3 meetings, maybe, Steve, kind of refining definitions about what each data set was, and we're all coming to agreement on what they are. And I felt like we achieved that, and then we were able to use them as baselines for the plan. These were the school board guiding principles that you delivered to the superintendent and he delivered to us. We brought them forward in every meeting, and we checked off on them between every meeting to make sure that we were still achieving them and that we weren't deviating. Since you wrote those, you don't need to go through them. The committee expectations. In the first meeting, we asked the committee members what their expectations were for why they were there and what they wanted to get out of their significant investment in time over the course of a couple months. So these are important, and I think I'll highlight a few. A defensible plan based on data. From the start, the committee felt that if they were going to own this recommendation and this plan, it had to be defensible. We always talked about the supermarket conversation. When your neighbor walks up and says, "What the heck?" you say, "Well, let me explain to you what it is," and they can do that. And we checked off with that 3 times throughout the process. Are you comfortable with the supermarket conversation? I think that's an important one in this community. We want to create a master plan beyond the bond. So there's both short-term and long-term. We approach planning with no preconceptions. That was important for Doug and I to do. We really tried to hang up and say, we're open to anything. And we talked about that at the first few meetings, and I believe that everyone was very comfortably in that mode by the 3rd through 5th, 6th meeting. There were no preconceptions. And folks, the cross-committee conversations emphasized that people were open to to a lot of options, let the data and the programming drive us where it needed to drive us. Any questions on the committee's expectations? Okay, so that was what contextualized the work. The general findings from the plan. So then we brought forth the data that had been
Sorry,
collected.
so can I interrupt for a
You
second?
bet.
On that previous slide, the committee expectations. We challenged ourselves as much as possible, and you know this is hard for me to do, is to be kind of quiet participants. But I would say one of the things that I think was very encouraging to hear, but more importantly, kind of as it played out in the process that I think was really healthy for us, is that third bullet from the bottom is the group that came together kind of on day one had, much like our community, has a little variety of opinions about this issue, these issues. This has been a very controversial issue among most everybody in this community. And I have to tell you, to watch and to see different-minded people have the respect for each other, the rapport with each other, to respectfully disagree, to challenge things, to ask questions, to I cannot think of one time where it really ever got out of hand, or where, I'll say I was a little bit nervous because we've recently been through some experiences where things did get out of hand and they were ugly. And so I really want to applaud the committee, but especially the facilitation of the committee in helping to work through that in a civil way. And really, you know, and the bottom line is nobody necessarily, they agreed to think critically, but at the same time not just come, you know, so staunch in an opinion about one thing that it completely, you know, tanked the process. And so there's some good work that was done around that. I didn't want that to go unnoticed. I know it's a bullet that's on that list, but it definitely, for me, I don't know if you guys that were there would agree or disagree with it, but I want that noticed specifically.
Greg, do you have any comments on the community expectations or how that process went?
You guys summed it up.
I was pleased that from a third party, we definitely had folks come in with sort of bookended ideas about what should happen. And they probably aligned with where your community was sort of sitting. So we had I felt we had a good representation, and we worked towards a collaborative recommendation. So felt good about that. Okay, we went through the data. Susan, did you have a question? So a capacity data. So the capacity data was our review of the actual spaces you have in your schools, the number of students you have in your schools, the number of students you desire to have or can have per classroom, the square footage of those classrooms, and the programs you're trying to deliver. And what that data led to, and we'll get into some more detail, is that the elementary schools are your highest need, and the committee agreed. And that additional capacity is needed to handle both current and future enrollment for your elementary schools. Followed closely by the high school, but most importantly the elementary. The middle school capacity is currently adequate for the near term, and immediate growth didn't raise any huge alarms. Future growth is probably something like that. So that, most importantly, that was at the early stages we realized that. And the committee's final recommendations, if the board chooses to implement, would resolve most capacity deficits at all grade levels in the near term. So kudos to them on working up a solution that really addresses those capacity issues. We did a physical condition review. We looked at the ICOS database, which Doug can speak to if you have any questions. It's your documentation of your facility's physical status, physical condition. Most of your buildings, given their ages, are in really good shape. We didn't find any buildings that required immediate attention from a physical standpoint. Certainly some need some maintenance work and continued operations, but your district's done a nice job of keeping them up. So you're not in a massive backlog that's causing some. And some districts we work with are in that situation. So nice work. So the committee's recommendations do not include any specific near-term actions related to physical condition. Long-term, obviously you'll need to replace them as funding and maintenance.
So maybe I'll lean a little bit more Doug on this question, but we collectively, certainly I know that ICO's data wasn't necessarily something that I had spent a lot of time in looking at and evaluating, but Doug, could you kind of give us a 30,000-foot view of what would drive an ICO score down? And in their notebook, there's I believe it's in, I can find exactly which tab it's in, but you actually have the scores of each of our schools, but what generates those scores? What kind of things would you typically see that would make a school from scoring high to scoring low?
Now the database is actually a weighted database. It has a couple of 3 dozen building systems in it: roofs, floors, windows, doors, superstructure, foundations, those kinds of things. And each of those systems has different weight in the total score of a building. So for instance, if a building had a roof that was failing, that would generate a lower score for your building than doorknobs that are failing. So when these buildings are reviewed, each of those systems is scored, and those more critical building systems relating to structure, life safety, water integrity, those big ones, are the more sensitive to a low score than finishes and aesthetic issues. So, and all of your buildings scored in the fair or above fair range, which tells me that those critical systems are still living within their life expectancy and doing okay. And then, of course, you got a large number of improvements done in the 90s to many schools, which generated and then you've maintained your buildings well since then, which generated those good scores. So does that help, Josh?
So in the meeting number 2 tab it looks like this, if you want to make reference to it, is the ICO summary for our district. It's behind the big packet of the presentation. It's a 1-page spreadsheet that's turned sideways. The other really important thing that's on this that some of you have asked for, and so it's partially why I'm really focusing in on it. There's often been questions about when a particular building was built, when it was renovated, what the dates are, the square footage. So this has everything all kind of in one nice little place. And so you see in there each of the schools. You'll notice, and please Doug, correct me if I'm wrong in this, or Eric, you've done a lot of work with it too, but the buildings are, so like a school may have multiple buildings that are considered, and so that's why they're broken down. So, and some of that is based off of original construction, so it's based off of how it's been modernized and things like that. So a good example, like you'll notice Chief Moses Middle School actually shows up on there as the new gym, the original gym, and the main building as 3 separate, and so they score them all separately. So, this particular page, I know both for the short term and long term has a lot of data that I really would encourage you to be familiar with. I think it's great that this recommendation has that there's nothing significant coming out of there. That's something for us to celebrate. But on the other hand, I think there are some things that are popping up in there that you really need to be truly aware of. So I will also say, and I'll say this as the layperson in the construction world, I think that there is among the experts some skepticism about the accuracy of this, or not, I guess accuracy isn't, but these scores are generated by a review that they come on site, is that right?
Yeah, this level of facility review is what I would call a walkthrough evaluation. No one's tearing walls apart or roofs apart to look inside the building. These are architects and engineers that are walking through and evaluating a building by what they see. So compared to a more destructive or in-depth analysis that you might do on a particular building that you knew had seismic issues, for instance, you'd start dismantling elements to take a look at that. I will say, however, that for the most part, school buildings can be reasonably evaluated by on a walkthrough basis, especially if they're reasonably current, 30 years old or less. Older than that, then if a building's older than that, then these reviews can be a little bit deceptive. You might miss some hidden infrastructure deficiencies if you're just walking through the building. I haven't found these evaluations to be deceptive. They're just not terribly in-depth.
So thank you. I also point you to this page because I know that one of the things, and maybe I'm the only person, I'll make that assumption right now, but I know I've heard from some of you that people among our community often have a feeling about the low quality of some of our facilities, or that they're in dismal condition. And I just need to anchor you in this page that by this state kind of standardized scale, and I guess there might be a misalignment between people's perception and what is kind of a standardized score among schools. And for a district, and we're nearing that 30-year mark on many of our buildings, and this is just about the physical condition of the building. It's not about the numbers and all those other things, but we're most of our schools, you see, I think the lowest one on the whole chart is the main building at Moses Lake High School, which might make sense because it was one of the first things renovated and remodeled. So I think you see some correspondence. The building we're sitting in right now has 100% conditional rating, so it was one of our most recent constructed. So there's a lot of parallel between those two. So, I just didn't want that to go
Why no wrestling room?
Why no wrestling room? The wrestling room, I'll tell you, is kind of a mystery, and that's because it was donated. It was built by volunteer labor, time. I think even the materials were donated. And so it's kind of this anomaly, and I'll tell you, it kind of creates some interesting issues in the state construction systems because it's like it doesn't exist, but it does. It's a really strange, so it's...
If the roof starts to leak, call me.
Were you one of the original?
Yes.
So basically, according to the state's records, that facility doesn't exist.
So it is on our inventory.
Yeah, and some things it appears on and some things it doesn't appear on. Which I think, that's not the only, I believe the Lions Field locker room, team room was also built the same way.
Yes, that was.
Do we have any others that were volunteer donated built?
I'm sorry?
I thought there was one more thing.
So did I. So,
Well, when the pool, before it had the permanent bubble, didn't count against our states. But once we put that to say the pool, then now it counts against our states.
They do exist on our insurance policy.
It's good, it's important.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Debbie Downer, you're reminding us that.
Right on, buddy, you did it.
And we do use them for classrooms. I also want to point that out. Well, we don't use the team room, but the wrestling room does have PE classes.
And I think one part of that too, when we were doing weight training, gosh, darn, I'm trying to think way back then. Is that part of that? Are we using,
That's space where.
I think, but it wasn't, because we had worked on that too.
It's
I became a mason.
I will tell you that it's going to create an interesting situation for us moving forward into the future, just the wrestling room. Wrestling is a prominent activity in our community. Because it doesn't really exist on some inventories, but does on others, there's going to come a time and a place where we have to figure out what to do with it. And we're at that phase already. It's showing its age. And we provide upkeep and maintenance to it, but it's, yeah. We could probably spend the whole day talking about that, but we won't. So.
Sorry we did that.
No, it's very fortunate for us to have it. It's just, we're gonna have to figure out, the next step with it along the way. So, sorry.
Any other questions about physical condition of school?
Do we know when those were last updated? I want to say it was like 2000.
It's fairly recent.
Yeah, I think, what didn't Washington
Yeah,
State do the
WSU.
last group?
Let's not comment about the quality of the people who came out to observe them.
Oh, now we say WSU and you're all concerned, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, some people get excited when they say their college, he gets defensive. I should tell you something.
Only with you.
These are recent
So
numbers.
you taught at.
How can you add that building?
Skis?
Listed.
These are just school facilities.
Just a school.
So we use those scores, again, to give the committee some data sets to say,
Good question, now that I said that.
Is that, this is all.
Do you know what-
It's the first one.
Do you know why like some district facilities that are not schools are not on the list, but there's some that are on the list?
Like what we're doing down there in our food area?
Yeah, like the warehouse, the food
In
service.
theory,
the-
like those captures all buildings, whether they're instructional or not.
Okay.
I don't happen to know why these are blank.
And it's possible we just didn't put them on this list so that we could update it to include those. I think you started quoting the original too.
so along
I know it's good to include lease space, like the maintenance facility, sorry. The maintenance facility that's leased would not
Would not
appear in our
count.
inventory. I'm sorry, I really will be quiet.
So along physical condition scores, we also do a functional adequacy evaluation of each of your schools, generally only the schools. And what we're looking at when we do an evaluation of the schools is how well does that school, how adequate does that school function for the educational program you're trying to deliver. It's a unique, so it's a unique thing to schools, because as your educational program changes, your spaces sometimes change and sometimes don't. And when they don't, now you have a bit of some tension, or you know, a little bit of a collision even sometimes. It's similar to, in meeting 2 was a robust data meeting. If you go back a few slides, you'll have a combined data slide that has red and it looks like this. And that will give you both the functional adequacy scores and the physical condition scores for each building. And then the descriptions for both. And by looking at it, you'll see that many of the elementary schools were scored as poor, one as unsatisfactory, and how they function, how the building functions to support those programs. So what we did is we pulled all the data that anything that was not anything that didn't pass as fair or good, we pulled for each school, and that's included also at the end of the meeting 2 notes, right behind the sheet you're just looking at. And anything that's highlighted in gray is related to reportable. And that's important because while the district uses portable strategically, and many districts do, and while the committee discussed how the portable should fit into their recommendation, and I believe they came up with a good strategy base, generally, they're not considered permanent classroom space. So when a program is in a portable, it's generally scored low, unless there could be some specific instances when it's not on our sheet. And so, and our sheet is just a template, and then what we did is we basically built a scoring mechanism with the district office to say, how do you want us to score these pieces? That's important because the first round we did not, there was one element that we did not find in any schools, and we scored it as a 0, which gave it a poor rating in that area. We went back and found out that program's not offered. So there's no need for that space. So we went back and rescored it. So that's why there's that relationship between the program being delivered at each grade level and the building that's in. If you flip through those items, you'll see that there's everything from commingling of buses and cars and students in parking lots and driveways, which is a safety issue, to special education spaces not being at the current standards the district would expect, to pre-K students and K students in classrooms that were not designed for pre-K and K classrooms. They're fine, they're safe, but they're not meeting necessarily supporting the instructional purposes that a classroom built for those purposes would. It would be like you could teach home ec in a normal classroom with little hot plates on desks, but no one would argue that that's a home ec classroom. That would be one example. We did not find that.
So any of this that we're doing online and building that we're using?
We did not evaluate your online, we did not, because there's no physical space. There is a room that they come to get some support in, but we treated that like a program room. And that was fine, as long as you have a space for the online kids that come and meet with folks,
I think
right?
he's talking about so we have We have some kids that are on the high school campus, this is what you're talking about, that have a kind of a program support room in one of the classrooms.
Yes.
But we have a whole other facility that is our online learning center. It's currently functioning in leased space down on
We did
Ivy
not
Street.
strike
Same thing that's going on with our auto mechanics. It's a leased area, but it's going to have to be part of something here pretty soon because we're losing that building because the Big Bend is no longer going to be part of it.
Correct, and those, if I can hold that intention until we get to the programming piece, because you're right down the middle of, if that's programming we're gonna carry into the future, we need to recognize that we need appropriate space for it. So we did not evaluate the lease spaces. So the committee was interested in seeing which of the score, where were the scores dropped by programs being in portables, and where were the scores dropped by other issues. So then we walked through that. We spent the better part of the meeting talking through the functional accuracy. At the end, even though they do score as poor and one is unsatisfactory, none of those issues rose to the level where that building, because of its function, immediately needs to be addressed. So in the recommendation, what you'll find is that there's no recommendation specifically for functional adequacy around any of those buildings. It wasn't drive. It has to be a pretty rough situation for functional adequacy to drive a replacement of the building.
Which reminds me of one very
Okay, so
Go ahead.
questions on any of the data sets? Capacity, class size, physical condition, functional adequacy, how classes are utilization of spaces. I'll speak to portables real quick because it broaches both the data and the recommendation piece. When a district adds 10 portable classrooms, I'll make up a number, to a school that's built for 450 students, all the core spaces were built for 450 students. So you've now added, say, roughly 250 additional students. But your core spaces are now too small. So what that means is you can't fit everybody in the lunchroom under the program that you serve in lunch. So you have to change the way you serve lunch. When you use them for lunchroom and you're also using it for PE, you don't have enough time to do PE anymore. It's an elementary school. So now that cuts into that. Your hallways weren't built for that many kids walking through them. Your restrooms weren't built. So everything is balanced on the core spaces. If you have a gymnasium, it was built for that number of students. So that's where portables, while they do house students in classrooms, and they're a good mitigation strategy when you don't have enough space, they do start to put stresses on the core spaces. In the middle school and high school, that includes your specialty spaces.
I also want to add in this whole functional adequacy conversation, one of the issues that the committee grappled with for quite some time, and when you look through that data set and you look through the areas that were scoring low is, and this isn't a new issue because we've talked about it a number of times, but I want you to know that they discussed it, is the whole, some of our elementary schools have both gyms and cafeterias and some do not. I'm drawing a blank on the exact numbers. There's still a significant number of them who have one shared space that's both a gym and a cafeteria. And as a result of that, many of those schools score low on the functional adequacy because it does impact their program. In those schools, especially for any inclement weather months, we have to adjust PE around lunch. There's some significant programming breaks. Now, the committee, I will tell you, and while you'll see when it gets to the recommendation, it doesn't address it. And there was some intentionality behind that, is that it wasn't acknowledged as a need or something to figure out, but the committee ultimately got to a place where it wasn't the highest priority, and also it has some longer impacts of, so I'll throw this out there. Like, there was conversation about, should we take those schools and build them either a cafeteria or a gym, and the gym was the kind of the conversation piece, and ultimately they talked a lot about that. But I want you to have that piece of information because I know, especially for our student, staff, and the communities of each of those schools that have those combined spaces, we continually hear about how disruptive it is to the school function, to how things happen. And so it's not that it wasn't, nobody ever thought about it, it's just There's only so much capacity, and that wasn't really, and we'll get to that more in the recommendation part, but that was a big functional adequacy part of the conversation, was around those elementary school gyms. And I think I know Garden Heights, Lakeview,
Larson Heights.
Longview are the shared.
Peninsula has a.
Peninsula has
cafeteria.
so Peninsula has a separate, St. Joe Park do, Knowles does, North does,
Midway does.
and Midway does. So it's a 4-6 split of who does and who doesn't.
But some of those, it's problematic too, because Midway, for example, the cafeteria is tiny, so you can only fit so many kids in there, so there's some of that piece.
It's a nice little segue, actually, as we go into the recommendations. Because that was I'd say a multi-meeting conversation about how best to address elementary capacity. And we talked about gyms, we talked about cafeterias, we talked about could you take, what are the portables and build wings into those schools to get the kids into permanent housing. And the committee, and I'll ask Greg and Steve here in a second if they want to add anything, but the committee, as we worked through this process, came up with a recommendation of not one, but 2 new 450 student elementary schools. And then when we ran the numbers on how that would impact school capacity, it turned out that addresses the issue we talked about, because when you reduce those elementary schools back down to the size they were built for, there is enough, in most of them, there is enough space to deliver, for example, your PE program, because now you're down to 1 lunch or 2 lunches instead of 3 or 4 lunches. So your time period is squished down. So it addressed a few of the issues better, I think, than when we were looking at trying to drop additional pieces on these existing schools and see what would happen. And in the committee, we had the architect that you've been using and the construction manager engaged by the district, and with Doug's help also, so that there was ability to have high-level costing conversations about, like, what's a gym cost at a school? What's it? So while no one would want to sit on tight numbers, they were able to have to kind of layer that piece in. Greg or Steve, any conversation on that? Is that fair representation how we kind of landed on the 2 elementaries?
I would be curious to see if there was any conversation regarding if you're putting a building here and you're building something that you don't have to have the building, what is the community going to say? I've got the old one and I've got this thing sitting out here because nobody wanted to build onto our school and make it better than what we're doing, getting ready to build. Is there any conversation about that kind of?
I don't completely understand the question.
The question is, I'm living at a, let's say, at my school, and we don't have room for everything, but we're gonna slap something out there and we're gonna have to go there. And yet we're building a brand new school and we're gonna have it all include in the building.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion on building standalone gyms
Yeah.
and adding on to existing elementary schools. So there's quite a bit of discussion on that. And, you know, from what I heard, and this is not my opinion, but just from what I heard in the committee, is that would be like a next step. Like the biggest need that the school district had was to address the unhoused students at the elementary schools. So the kids in portables at the elementary schools, and also deal with the road. So those 2 things were more pressing than adjusting the current elementary schools, and that was more like a second tier, next level type deal. So we didn't rule that out, but it wasn't something that we felt that was a big concern as getting these kids into.
Because I must be talking to maybe some other people than you that were in that committee. A number of the input that I'm getting is if you're going to, because this report was out long before we even looked at it. And people were telling me what I was gonna be voting on. But one of the questions was, you're just gonna make this, kind of just add on a little barn over here so the kids can take care and we won't be moving them from elementary over to Chief Moses. And yet you're gonna be building something that's gonna be better than what my kid's going into, that kind of thought.
Tell me if I'm wrong here, I don't think they're saying that at all. They're saying we're not building anything at these additional, at the schools that already exist, instead of just building new schools, and then they're taking some of those kids out of that existing school to relieve the population pressure. Is that correct?
That's, people were telling me that they thought what was going on because of what the committee, and I mean, I wasn't there, I didn't hear it, but they were asking me the question.
Yeah.
Are we just gonna add on to stuff and all, my kid will have to go into the old junky one and you're gonna have a new one?
There's definitely, this process being as it was, there was definitely several misconceptions about things. I know I spent the better part, especially over the last month, kind of diffusing rumors or beliefs that this had already been decided, or even this morning, actually, as I was getting ready to come here, I received an email from somebody who was curious about why this, and it was something that was discussed kind of as a committee process, but it was never, I mean, this is the official recommendation coming to you, so the rest of those were all kind of, what I would say, planning and discussion items, and then they got filtered out into being, but these were decisions. And I keep reinforcing to people too, is that our process is a recommendation for you to consider for taking action. So when I say no decisions have been made about it, truly no decisions have been made about it. So, but it definitely, I know what you're saying though, because it definitely, especially when we get to the high school portion of this, has been, everybody has got it all figured out with what we've said we're doing.
That's hilarious. I've had more people tell me what we're doing, that they obviously know something I don't.
Oh,
They know what the
well,
plan
hello,
is,
you
and
and I are
have
talking
no
the same
idea.
people.
Yeah.
Like,
And I will say, and I'm very comfortable saying this, that we pushed really hard, we would not move forward until we had unanimity among the committee for each of these recommendations. So there should be no committee member that would tell you that they didn't agree with one of these, because we got, is that a fair statement?
That's totally true.
Yeah, and sometimes it kind of, sometimes it took a little longer, but we didn't want to push, like it wasn't a majority vote, like if 4 people didn't agree. If they said they agreed and then they changed their mind, we had to look at that, but I felt like everyone came to a general agreement.
Nice.
Is that true, Jeremy?
You don't trust Kim?
No, I'm just
I would say yes. Do I personally still have some reservations? Absolutely. But I think with the data that was presented and the data that exists, absolutely, 100% agree.
And I would say, that's the reason we invited these 2 gentlemen, I would say you both still have some reservations, but yet the committee's you support the committee's recommendation. So we sincerely wanted folks that maybe personally have some questions, but support the recommendation.
And part of what I think, what I was hearing were people that had come to the meeting and then chose not to continue to go to the meetings. And I don't know how many of those people there were.
One.
Was there just the one?
It took a lot of meat
No,
off the
I'm
bone
not
every
doing
meeting. I
anything.
mean,
Oh, it's Greg was sleeping early. You already talked. He was busy coaching and stuff. All just fine.
Yes, I have a question about what's on the paper. What percent excess capacity would we then have if we were to build these 2 elementary schools next year? How long would that take us before we're in a situation where we need to build something else?
You might want to go up to the hospital and see how many babies you have. Well, that's what we do.
Okay, so what's the number?
We did,
So we're 90?
in 1819, your enrollment, so if we take, when we
So
look
where
at.
is that in this?
Sorry, meeting 3, there's some capacity, and there are many of them, but I haven't grabbed one. There's some capacity versus enrollment for elementary. And the number I'm looking at is that if you currently this year have roughly 835 students who are not in a permanent classroom, doesn't mean they're not in a classroom, they're in a portable. And if our goal is to get every kid out of a portable, which is probably not a realistic goal, but that's the numbers, that's the baseline we're working with. It looks like next year, Elliot, you'd have 906, and 1920 you'd have 954.
Which slide would you have?
It looks like this one. It has a graph. There's a series of
Which brings me to another question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, as a board, I guess we never stated in our expectations that we want to get rid of all the portables. And that's like a big assumption.
Which we did not carry forward for that reason.
Okay, so when you use these numbers, 835, 906,
Yep.
that's assuming no portables, right?
Correct. It doesn't mean we have to meet those numbers. That's just the baseline.
And so, how many portables would we still be using if we were to build these 2 schools?
So if you built 2 450 student schools, back 900 students out of that, you'd have 54. These numbers are all wrong, right? Because they're projections. But you'd have 54 students left, which would be roughly 2 classrooms in a portable, 3 classrooms in a portable.
So, have you guys thought through what that would we actually be down using 2 or 3 portables? Would we
Well,
get rid of them?
Well, for instance, at one of the schools, they have a music program and portables. In another school, they have the library and a portable. So those are kind of special use classrooms that.
But they're not being used as classrooms right now.
Correct. You might reutilize your portable spaces.
So if we have, what, 74 portables, 50 are being used for classrooms right now?
So 74 classrooms.
74 classroom portables, 74 total.
And not 74, it's 74 total classrooms.
So-
Yeah, different cool classes.
So from a practical standpoint, the portable conversation, and this is and I'm glad we're kind of flushing through this, because you are right, is we collectively, by the board or necessarily the district, set a hard stance that absolutely, one of our targets is to wipe out all portables. But I think it has to be on the horizon for a potential conversation of when, and for a variety of reasons. Number one is many of our portables are going to age out, and so if we continue to plan on using them as classrooms, like if we consider them capacity numbers, we're soon going to find ourselves where we're going to have to do upgrades to the portables. So that's one issue. The second issue of it is and Phil kind of said this before, is the portables, realistically, I don't see them just going away. What I see them being is they become our longer term flexibility for when, if these numbers are higher than 906 and it becomes 950, then we have that built-in place across our elementary schools that are there. So I guess it's, how can I best put this? So the goal of really minimizing our reliance on them is probably the real goal versus just wiping them off. Now, down the road, when we start renovating those 8 elementary schools, 10 years down the road from now, we are going to have some conversation around, do we renovate and plan to leave portables there, or at that point of renovation, do we take those portables away? And there's, right now, the condition of our portables, in most of our schools, there's little pods of portables, most of our elementary schools. So if you go to Midway, if you go to Peninsula, if you go to Garden Heights, if you go to Lakeview, they're kind of plopped I can't really think of any, with the exception of maybe Longview, that has just kind of a single unit that's there. So
Is this where you want me to dig into the weeds, or do we want to save this till later?
Well, can I share with you, I don't know. We did have this conversation with the committee, because for planning data, we had to sort of have a baseline. And we have our capacity baseline. That doesn't mean that has to get to 0.
Okay, let me ask a question, and then you can tell me if you want to talk about
Yeah.
this type of stuff later. Eric, our average cost for maintenance is about $7 a square foot, right? I mean, it's kind of the number that you came up with, $7.50. And so we have, let's say 50 portables that are being, how many square foot are in each, how many square feet are
And
in each
what
portable?
do you get, double or single?
Roughly.
It's about 900 square foot classroom, roughly, so.
So what is that?
For each classroom.
$300, so how much in maintenance are we talking? Anyway, I guess my point is, what are we gonna do with the portables? If we build these 2 elementary schools and we have these portables sitting there, the odds of them going away in my mind are not super high. Like, I don't envision us going and tearing out portables real quick. And so we're building space to replace portables, but then we're not getting rid of portables. Well, that doesn't mean that there isn't a continued cost of ownership, right? You talk about how these things are getting more run down, requiring more maintenance. Well, they will still continue to require maintenance and operation if we continue to use them. So we need to figure out, are we actually going to get rid of them, or are they going to continue to be in our inventory, and something we have to pay for? So.
it definitely, as this recommendation comes forward, and the conversation we're having right now, it probably is a timely conversation for us to have as for example, if you over the coming weeks, as we navigate through this process, made a decision to build as this recommendation, and then all of a sudden we found ourselves with excess portables, the next question around that's going to be, this isn't the first time we've been down this road. We have, we've been faced before where we make the decision, do you surplus them? Do you sell them off? Do you take them off of the properties? And that's exactly what we would have to grapple through. I think the trend, and you guys work with many more districts than I do, I think the trend, unless they were originally intended to be temporary space, but there are schools that remodel, for example, a whole high school, and they bring in 80 portables to just kind of fill their needs at a time. But the trend in most of them is that the people typically don't uproot them and move them, especially with the age of some of ours that have, they've been there for, some of them 25 plus years. So I think that's still the committee did not grapple with that issue specifically of like, do you wipe them out? Do you start, off-selling them? But you're bringing up some good points about what do we do. I'll tell you, our past practice has been, they become used for a variety of things. A, for storage, B, for professional development spaces, and then as the student numbers increase, you move all that stuff out and you put another class back in there. So it's kind of, you repurpose it temporarily until it's back being needed again.
Which is ironic, we're talking about getting them out of our inventory just so we can then move them back into our inventory. But the number, I guess, is about $315,000 if you apply our average cost of maintenance per square foot. That's how much we're spending annually on 50 portables, assuming that 50 is the number that are used for classrooms.
If they're being used.
Yeah, and I guess so these are real numbers. It makes a difference. I'm not saying I'm against the idea. I just want to make sure we're taking things into consideration.
So I think the committee went along the same lines as you, and what they felt was that students should be in permanent classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But the district should not, the committee did not support a goal or even want to go there of 0. What they said was, let's have these things used strategically for growth and for if you're going to remodel schools and things. So you'll need to keep some number of empty portables in inventory, and their maintenance costs should go down, but you'll have some maintenance costs.
They're actually empty.
Correct, because if you'll want to, as you'll address the elementary schools as they become eligible for state funding in the long term, then you'll probably address some of the portables if you leave them on that location. But between now and then, you'll have to strategically choose. Many districts keep a certain number in inventory for growth, for future projects, and then they do divest of the oldest ones because they don't want to carry the overhead cost.
So the portable thing kind of is one of the things that I'm concerned about. Maybe we need to have a policy as a district about what portables, like what do we do with portables? In other words, what is their life cycle supposed to be? What are the things that are okay? Because if they just sit there, they're going to get used. And I'm okay with them being used, but we need to take that into account as we plan, because there's a cost associated with use. And so maybe we need to have a written out plan about what we're going to do.
And Elliot, can I? Well, I'm asking, you use the word policy, but I guess what I'm asking is, it sounds more like a more ironed out process and idea of how portables come into our system, how they're used, when they're phased out, when they're potentially recarpeted, renovated. I mean, there's a variety of issues. So, and you're right, that's probably absent from our work right now. We tend to do it on an as-needed basis. And so that's been our history for the last several years. Is as a good example is this summer we're putting a portable in at Sage Point because we don't have enough classrooms there. So the space is needed there, so we site a portable at Sage Point. But I think what you're requesting is to have some sort of guidelines that help drive the decision of when, how they're used, what they're used for, and when they age out, and at what point.
Kind of like
And as a part of a bigger, I guess, strategy towards space utilization and capital investments.
And I'd love to see as well, we're doing that work also, maybe embed in there the considerations for what types of portables we site at schools. And what I mean by that is, I'm not talking about the building itself, but for example, I think all of our elementary portables are wet portables where they have running water in them, they have restrooms, they have all, I think, most of them are at least, especially the ones used for classrooms. At the secondary level, they're all dry portables. So there's no running water, there's no restrooms. And so that has a major safety, security, student flow, functional adequacy issue because, for example, at the high school, and as we've studied the safety and security, you know that for kids to use the restroom, they have to leave the portable and go into the building. So perhaps all of that could be embedded as some of that planning of, what types of portables do we install into it.
well, and that also is an issue for the teachers. They're not going to walk out of the classroom and leave those kids there to go into the main building to use the bathroom.
The
You
committee,
should leave the classroom to begin with.
Well, but, some days you have to.
the committee would have very much appreciated a procedural document along those lines, because these were similar conversations to what, and we had to just put pins and stuff and say, we don't know exactly what the district wants to do, but let's make some planning assumptions of trying to get kids out. It gives the district options on what to do.
And I think a good place to maybe even start with it too, as part of that procedural document is also, so while we have numbers and we can tell you, this school has this many portables and it's in there, if you are curious about it, is I'm not sure that we've done a lot of study of the current condition of them, the use. I mean, I'll tell you by and large, the majority of them are currently being used to educate kids. They're classrooms. There's very few that are still today a storage here or storage there. I mean, it's minimal.
Like Boys and Girls Club up in North, they're portable.
So they have some grant programs or anything, but I think, we don't have necessarily great data about, when they were purchased, what work's been done to it, what condition they're in, if they're wet or dry, because they don't, when we talk about like the ICOS data for the permanent school facilities, nobody really looks at unless we do internally the portable
I
condition
would,
history.
I would think that our maintenance department would have that information.
Yeah, we have work order history.
Easily.
We could just compile
In
it.
the last 3 years, I can only think of one portable we had to put a bit of money to. It was at Lakeview.
Yeah.
There's a floor joist issue and some rotting issue.
And-
But other than that, we haven't.
Well, I think that's a great idea, and perhaps as we look at what we're going to be doing in the future, it's a bit like our curriculum. At some point, you're going to go, maybe it's every 5 years or every whatever, and go through and assess this, the same thing that we do with our curriculum. Every so many years, you go through and.
I would like to know, I think the two of you just agreed on something.
I know,
Maybe
it's
one
kind
of
of
them
exciting.
itself,
Come on,
but,
Elliot. Come on, buddy.
But I know one of the committee conversation pieces was maybe am I dreaming this or
You
guys
probably
don't
are,
have it?
but go.
There was some conversation perhaps about even starting to set some targets about, for example, some percentages, like a 10% reduction of portables per year. We never went there, and it kind of
That's where we use the term, the district strategically utilize portables as needed, which kind of drives you to, what is your procedural plan for portables? So I would say the community and the district are aligned on that need.
Well, that's pretty exciting, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I want to use one last example. When we got this portable for Sage Point, we have to look at our inventory and see where if we had a portable that was being used for storage or was available somewhere else before we went out and bought one.
We didn't have any portables that were easily accessible to move or anything like that.
And our
And
community.
when we looked at the prices of, in general, the portable versus the movement of students who are trying to move grade levels to other schools, we said, what was best for programming and students, and so we.
But did we look and see if we had any portables that were currently utilized for something not?
No, we did not
related to
specifically
teaching?
do that.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing where we'd be able to say we have 2 portables.
and that could be one of the filters in that operational plan is that before we purchase new portables, we know what all.
This.
Especially when we have 50 of them sitting there after we build 2 elementary schools.
Well, and you have known costs such as what it costs to move a portable. So you can calculate those in, is it cheaper to move, to divest, to buy? And what's your long-term plan look like?
Yeah, but the price of
But
doing
that,
that would not.
but why then? Why? Because isn't this wasn't there some place in here to build, to expand? So if it's gonna cost more to expand, why are we building to expand?
So the Sage Point Park Orchard design, I would tell you, it had from the players involved, it had some push behind it to say, make these buildings to be able to be expandable. And so the design of those buildings were done in a way that it's a square. And so basically on the 4 corners of each of the buildings, it was established with the way the traffic, the hallways come together and everything, that you could add some additional classrooms in each of those corners. Now, I'm trying to think, it was probably about 3 years ago now, the board at the time did study that and looked at the cost for doing so. And this is something, and I want us to plant this in our head right now, because when we get to the high school stuff, it's going to have the same expandability conversations going to come up. Is it kind of reminds me of, I won't use bad analogies right now because I know Charles has got that live Facebook feed on. So, but it's one thing to say, we're going to build it to be expandable. It's another thing to say, we're going to build it to be expandable, and we know that at the point when we expand it, we should anticipate a range of costs to really do that. So I will tell you, and Vicki, I'm looking at you to kind of support this, is I think when the board looked at that, why don't we add 4 classrooms, for example, to Sage Point and 4 to Park Orchard, I think they were disturbed at what the cost would be to do just that. So it had the design to be expandable, but to actually go in there and do the work is, at the time, and I would still support, is not a good investment, because you're spending millions of dollars to add, and I think they would have one classroom at each corner. Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
So maximally you'd be getting 4 in each building. So yes, it solves some problems, but the investment and the resources that it would take to do that. So as we move forward with all of these,
How do we have this, anyway, that's,
as we move forward with all of these, I think that has to be part of our expandable conversation, is how and what does that, I guess we need to ask different questions.
Okay, and I might just say, because of the way they were proposed to the community as expandable, and now I hear community members, why are we putting portables at these brand new expandable elementary schools? That needs to be relayed to the community then, why they're there.
And perhaps
And
one
I
of
mean,
the,
really, but they need to know that, what happened
And I think
there.
there's also a kind of a difference between expandable, could it be expanded? Yes. However, when you're looking at a design where you're talking about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, where you have things specifically laid out, where you know it's all part of the complete design to a certain point, whereas those were designed as, here's the design, it could be expandable, there's a price cost to that, versus if that was phase 1 and then here's phase 2 and phase 3 of where it all ties together nicely, it's all planned, it's laid out.
you're bringing up a good point. That those are two very different approaches of
Right.
an expandable plan.
And that's probably where the community got it.
There was a perception of one thing versus
One thing
where-
versus the other thing,
Maybe
right?
you're-
Yeah.
Well, and as you look back at the number of years that we were talking about, and how costs have changed across time, what might have looked good, if I'm putting a room on my house. I'm
Back in
thinking,
2007 when Sage Point was
Yes.
being designed.
yeah, and I go, oh, that would be really cool. And now you're going, ew, I can't afford to do that now, because it's changed, the cost.
That again is an excellent segue to the committee's recommendation on elementary schools. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Susan.
And another aspect I'd like to, just put out there is, remember when we did the history thing, these 2 schools at Sage Point and Park Orchard are the very first schools we ever built, and we learned something on that model. And so we made the decision when we were going for number 11 to build those corners in at the get-go, because it's way cheaper to do it now than to think about doing it in 10 years. That's all.
Excellent
Susan,
point.
you bring up a great point, is that, I know hindsight's always 20/20, and it's easy, I guess it's easy for us to sit today and say, well, why not this? And I was guilty of that as anyone, but the district at the time had really, we've been in years and years of renovation mode, but we really had never been in planning for expansion, designing new school mode, and that's something that, Susan's right, we've learned some lessons from it, and certainly as we approach, future work with that.
And that's exactly why I bring up the point of it, is it expandable versus phase 1, phase 2. Because I think in the secondary space planning, that has to be a planning, in my opinion, in terms of phase 1, 2, 3, to accommodate growth, but that it's laid out very purposeful and designed from the get-go.
And a good evidence of this, that, lesson learned, is if you look at the Columbia Basin or CV Tech plans, they actually have the phases in there. They're in the drawings that basically say, okay, here's phase 1, here's the phase 2, phase 3. Now, phase 2 and 3 may never get built, but at least they're there with knowing what the plan is, where, and that was, yeah, that's what they're doing with the new high-tech center.
Yeah.
So the committee grappled with a few of these pieces also, and the reason, two of the key reasons they recommended 2 elementary schools immediately was not only for the address the capacity issue, but given the cost of construction and the escalation costs that Doug and the other architecture firm shared, that it looked like it's about 10% escalation per year, right? Next year. So you're by just getting started within 1 year, you could save upwards of about $2.5 million, rather than stage them. What we did is we looked at if they both came out together, or if you did one and then just did the next one, because that question came up. Could you just do one at a time? Well, yeah, but your cost is about $2.5 million more for the same thing. And then the second piece of that is if you build them at the same time, you have the opportunity to have additional cost savings, a little bit harder to calculate exactly what that is, on your design fees. You can do prototypical education specifications. You can maybe get some, design and engineering costs that can be similar between the two, or reduced because you're doing two at once. Working with the district now that has built two at the same time, and even though they got a little out of whack from the funding, they still were able to realize some of those savings. So that was what was undergirding the committee's recommendation on two, not just capacity, but also financial incentives for the district.
So there's some purchasing, you can get a better deal for two rather than one, you're fine, so.
We'll try to buy 2 cars at once. I'm serious.
I've done that, you get a better deal.
I think you have a good question though, because, you know, when you think about it too, contractors are gonna bid it. If they've got subs that are here for a larger job and they're flowing from one to the other, you know, it seems like you would get it.
However, the question again I'm going to ask, what is that going to do as I look back on what we have done with bonds in the past and whatever excess cash that we had when that was done? That was when there were better bid climates. And we did everything that we said we needed to do on the bond, and whatever was left, we were able to do the top of the swimming pool. We did the football field.
Totally Basin secondary.
Exactly. So for us to go forward with the 2 elementaries, and we get ready to do whatever we're gonna be doing with the high school, and we go, oops, we don't have enough money. This is a package, and I don't know what went on here, but I do know what I also get from people as I'm zipping around the community. And you and I might not agree with this, but it'll be exciting if we do.
The committee did feel it's important to have a contingency in the overall package. So and the current contingency, again, the numbers are, guideline numbers
Sure.
at best, is currently about $8.2 million. So $2 million of that, for example, that contingency, you can assume gets picked up if you do 2 at the same time and don't do them linearly. So if you choose to do 2, you could roughly cost you $2.5 million of that $8 million contingency if you stretch them out versus doing them at the same time. Maybe. Those are the questions that have to be decided in the next phase, should you approve moving forward. But those were what was underneath the committee's recommendation, to build up your contingency as much as possible.
Because we're assuming that the state is going to do what they said they were going to do with money for a high school. Unfunded,
Unhoused.
And so, given what's going on right now, it's kind of like you go to the casino and you got the money in your pocket and you don't.
Although Doug, I'm going to defer. He made a statement at a committee meeting that I think, and I know he's kind of chomping at the bit there to jump in here, but he made a statement about the predictability and longevity of that state construction assistance that I think is a critical piece of understanding there. And Doug, we didn't have a chance to kind of share resumes here, but Doug's done years and years of work kind of in this world, and so I want to kind of defer that question to him a little bit.
Take his job. Got it. Retired.
Should take his job. I have two comments to your question regarding the veracity of the state funding program. If I had to bet on any state funding program, I would probably bet on the capital program. It's been alive and mostly well for 3/4 of a century, I think. And the only time I've seen it actually have a hiccup was last year.
And is that also talking about the formulas that we're using to give us that?
I think the formulas will stay largely unchanged.
Really?
And as you probably know by now, they are kind of strange formulas. They don't necessarily emulate the real
Nothing
world.
that's real.
Where the biggest risk, in my opinion, in the state funding mechanism for school funding assistance is in the match ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with the wealth of your community. And as your community becomes more wealthy, your match ratio will probably go down a little bit, but not dramatically. The only time I've seen the match ratio factor really hurt districts was during the recession in 2007, 2008, when a lot of the assessed valuations in communities went wild, largely down. And some districts got caught, I worked with one in particular on the Washington coast, got caught, and they went from like a 57% match to a 23% match in 1 year. And others, it was a strange set of combined factors. Absent those kind of cataclysmic issues, I would bet on the state funding system. To your point, Vicki, about running out of money, some of the people in the room have heard me harp on this before, but my advice as a project manager / architect is that you don't design and build your elementary schools and get those fully committed financially until you know the cost of your high school project, so that you bring all of those projects up to the same level of cost certainty before you pull the trigger on the first project. And that's not easy to do, but it can be done. It can be done.
Because that delay.
Yeah, I've seen the last project in line get shortchanged too many times over the years.
Exactly.
Whether it's a high school or elementary school.
And you'll see Doug's warning emphasized from the committee. When I get to that piece, that's why it's coming as a package to you. Because they feel that getting to that cost piece as quickly as possible allows you to move forward on your elementary construction as quickly as possible, but not too early. So you know your final costs first.
Because you keep looking at what's going on with that inflation and it's out of control.
Yeah, scary times.
So, question on the short-term recommendation for the elementaries. Long-term recommendation was what we talked about. As the buildings become eligible, look at not only remodeling, refreshing, or possibly expanding some of those schools. That'd be excellent plans. But again, if you put it into elementaries, the committee felt strongly and the data would support that you address, and I think Elliot, maybe you'll agree with it, the majority of your capacity issues at the elementary, or enough of your capacity issues to get you into that next sort of bond phase. You'll have a few kids in portables, but you can be more strategic about it than reactionary. That's a fair statement. And I think that was the committee's goal on portables, is that the district gets to use them strategically and not just out of like, oh, look out, we got kids on tents or portables, we gotta choose. So. Middle schools, your middle school capacity, as we talked about, was sufficient right now. Even though you have like the Goldilocks Bears versions of the middle schools. You have a small, a medium, and a large. So there's not like one size, because what we look at sometimes is what size does the district want to have as their schools, which is why we kind of use 450 for elementary. But it's working for you. And certainly, I think the committee would feel that Endeavor would be the first place to start looking if you're going to do some work in the middle school, because it's currently in a facility that was built as an alternative high school. But it's working. And so they felt no short-term recommendation on that. And again, in the long term, improve the core spaces, particularly the gym, library, and cafeteria at Endeavor, and then incrementally enlarge or kind of figure out if you want to even out those sizes or not of your middle schools. But as we looked at your growth, you're sitting okay. For the high school, in the near term, and this is the one that
There's a slide or two behind.
Oh, I am. Thank you. Sorry.
That's why I'm here.
It's okay. Thank you. I'm flipping mine pages, but we'll get us caught up here for the gallery. So at the high school, I would say comfortably that these bullet points have been carefully wordsmithed and constructed by the committee to be exactly what they are, not more, not less. Because we spent a lot of time on the high school. Fair statement, Greg? So I actually want to go through these. So the first bullet point, in the near term, the committee recommends that the district conduct a comprehensive high school instructional program review and assessment to develop a vision for future instruction that meets the changing needs of our students and maximizes the use of state funding assistance. We hit a bit of a wall when we were using data to help us figure out what's the best high school solution, because we could not get a clear articulation of the trajectory for educational programming for 9-12. Fair statement? And so that we started going around in circles. Is it a different kind of school? Is it the same school? Is it expanding the current school? None of those decisions could be made so we understand what are you trying to do at 9-12. So the committee's recommendation to the district was that make a clear definition of what education you're trying to deliver in 9-12. And then from that point, you can get a sense of what kind of spaces do you need to deliver that. And do you have those current spaces at Moses Lake High School and just need more of them? Do you need more there? Or do you need a different kind of space at both locations? At one location, do you need alternative? Do you need portfolio spaces? What do you need? We couldn't answer that. So that's why that's the first bullet point. It's purposefully the first bullet point. We felt it's the missing piece of data.
It's also, I'll just, the whole second part of our study session was my administrative recommendation is a very expanded version of that top bullet point. So we'll come kind of back full circle to that and talk a little bit about the work that's been
We're
done.
trying to address that.
I hope to, although when I reread that just now, it's like, that's a really large undertaking. We'll talk about it. But yeah.
Did I fairly represent that, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Second bullet point, undertake facility-specific educational programming and initial costing activities at general level. Vicki, this is your point here. As prerequisites for citing decisions for a new high school number 2 facility. We're specifically using the language of facility because we don't know exactly what it's going to be. And we got kind of wrapped around the axle on where is it going to be? Is it next to the existing high school? Is it part of the existing high school? Is it a different place? Like, we don't know because we don't know what it needs to be yet. We don't know what program it needs to deliver. So that basically is the next necessary step. And citing is the work of this group, the board, not that committee. And we advocated that, but with the concept of the citing should be representative of the program trying to be delivered there, whatever that means, which we didn't know. And then we recommend that in 2020, the district bid and construct a new high school number 2 facility. Again, we don't know if it's a separate school or related or an academy, we don't know. As originally approved by the voters, that's the language, reducing anticipated initial size to accommodate approximately 700 to 900 students. That was the financial piece that we looked at with capacity. That's the need in the district from a capacity standpoint. So whatever you develop, whatever direction education programming takes us, the initial size should be about 700 to 900 students to address your capacity needs. And that will also financially not overbuild for you, so it will maximize your state funding without impairing your state. And then we also felt it was important to renovate Moses Lake High School in whatever manner the programming decides, the trajectory defined by the district. Moses Lake High School should be renovated to address those same pieces. For example, if you do a STEM program and have a specific engineering focus, that engineering should be available at Moses Lake High School if it's available at a separate facility also. There was an equity conversation that I think was important to capture about at that secondary level. If you do end up having separate facilities, there should be some kind of either rationale why they're two or equity between the two or both. Kristen?
Was there
I
any?
will say, I don't think that was really in your purview to talk about that. But
Sorry?
I don't think that was really in the committee's purview, but
It was the data we needed that we didn't have is the way it came up. Yeah, we were careful not. We're making a recommendation that to make a decision that way should be figured out, and we didn't have that data. Is that fair? We did not try to.
in other words,
I'll watch.
equitable placement of programs might not be the best choice.
It was a conversation. You notice we did not. It was a conversation.
Yeah, okay.
I think your community feels strongly about that. At least the folks we've met in the committee. Long term for the high school, renovate, enlarge, and replace Moses Lake High School based on age, functional needs, and state fund availability. And then eventually, thank you. Eventually, whatever your second school, if you have a second school, or your second facility will need to be replaced also.
Was there any information across the state to determine the average size of a high school? It's my understanding that the schools are smaller on the other side. Then we have the second largest in the state, and you've got Pasco and Tijuana, and I think they're ready for another.
We had some discussion about.
We had discussion about it, Vicki. We didn't actually do a state average size calculation. It would not be that difficult to do.
Because a lot of the information as I'm reading about what has been going on in our community and a lot of other communities about larger schools and what does that mean and how do we hang on to these kids and make sure that there's.
So we did have those conversations. We talked about if you have a large school, you run a different program than if you have a small school. That and that there wasn't a right or wrong. I think it was a better part of a meeting on this.
Yeah, and-
We did introduce that.
And as we're going into some mental health issues,
Yes.
because the state has not only said, get in it and get going, but we have our people here in our community as well and in Grant County that are going to be working on those things. And one of the things, as you look at all this community input that we're getting and from the mental counselors, is smaller is better.
So the 700 to 900 student number was generated not by a best practice that the committee determined, but by the capacity data and your growth data, and saying this should carry us in the future and ideally be expandable if we need to grow it in the future. But we did have conversation, because people ask that question, why can't you have a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 student high school? You can. You just run a little differently than you run a 600, but you just run differently and run a 600 student high school.
In the committee's discussions, there were advantages and disadvantages discussed on both large high school and small high school. And it looked like there were advantages and disadvantages both ways.
Sure.
That there was no right or wrong. So coming out of the committee, I don't think we came to a conclusion whether a large high school or small high school was better.
Also, no matter what you do, you're still gonna end up with large high schools by any definition of size, school size. Like even if you took Moses Lake High School and divided it into 3, they'd all still be large high schools by any statistical measure that determines high school size. When you talk about small schools, you're talking about like 100 student schools.
No, that's
We're not gonna end up with 100
that's not
student
what I'm
schools.
talking about,
Right.
so.
Anyway.
I think as we go forward, though, we're gonna be seeing, as the state continues to have us be the parents in a lot of things that we're doing with their kids. Like the fact that we now, if we see any of the kids that appear to be having some mental issues, well, what does that mean? But it is our responsibility to investigate. And so with all of that comes a whole lot of other things. And how do you, as you look at the 2,200 kids or whatever amount that was yesterday or whatever, and you say, how do you manage all of that?
And that was part of the driver on the first bullet point on near term, is that the committee, you know, after we spent quite a bit of time discussing, you know, why we were building a school, what the purpose of it was. We said we couldn't really decide what to build if we didn't know the purpose. And then we decided that wasn't up to the committee, that was up to the board. And so that was a big driver. And that, there's a lot of that we couldn't decide as a committee. We didn't have clear direction on that or even license to do that.
And as it appears, there's more and more legislators putting more on the schools to raise the kids. And I sat in those meetings yesterday when we were talking about the mental situation and our devices that the kids are using with their phones and everything else, and what that's doing to the brain and what's happening. I mean, and now they want us to continue to do more and more of that. And we're supposed to be there teaching them as well, and where the values come in and all this. To me, I just kind of like.
And one of the things that I'll add to this conversation, I think, and this is a little bit of a soapbox issue for me, and so I apologize in advance, but I'm of the mindset, and I could be completely off base in saying this, but high schools are an area of passion for me, but I'm of the mindset that there are multiple factors that drive a successful learning environment. One is size, one is program, one is the culture, the staff, the facility, the students, the student engagement of voice. And so I get very nervous when there's belief systems around that smaller is just better. And because you can have a really small school environment and you know, whatever the number is, it's irrelevant, but you can have a small environment, and if some of those other factors are toxic or negative, it's not going to be any more effective or positive for kids than the school of 2000. And so, and I know people disagree with that because sometimes they feel like, well, if it was smaller, then we could have a better culture and we could have a better connection with the kids. Well, there's probably some truth to that as well, but one of my roles in kind of alongside this has been doing a lot of research around this whole concept, because it's a question we constantly get. You know, who says bigger is better, or who says smaller is better, or who says what the right size is? And you know, in our country, schools vary in size greatly. Washington happens to be a state that has smaller than average high schools than other parts of the country, and so it's been an ongoing theme. And so when the time's appropriate, I'd love for us to be able to grapple with that a little bit, to see those different elements, because I think our charge as a system is to ensure that we've got the best of all of those different things, not just the school size bag factor. So, you know, we have to have effective educational programs. We have to have effective school cultures. We have to have effective school sizes. And the interplay of all those is really where the effectiveness comes. It's not just one factor alone. And you're right. The current challenges that are facing youth, both locally, across the world, with technology, with mental health, with the list is hard. Is that in some of those, for some kids, a really intimate, small environment is most effective. Which this actually kind of takes me back to, if you remember the conversations we used to have in reference to Columbia Basin Secondary School, it was this same discussion: is that what makes kids thrive in an environment differently, and for some kids being in that environment where they were, and so it's.
Or how many we have going to Wilson Creek.
And I also don't want to ever lose sight of that there are some kids, and I'll tell you this, that some kids that thrive better in the larger environment.
Yep.
So it's, sometimes we want to always talk about, one group or the other, but and I'll get off my soapbox because I can talk about it.
We'll get back on it.
Well,
We'll have a conversation.
anecdotally, now I don't remember what the causal factor of this. It was probably because Spokane was coming out on Freeman, and there was too many kids in the Valley Ford School, and we had room at Rockford. So the 7th and 8th grade got bused over to Rockford. So my class size from between 6th and 7th grade doubled. From, there was 24 kids, and it doubled to 48 kids. Do you know that in that other 24 kids, I was able to find people with common interests, and which I didn't have in my class. I was like really the odd one. But just by sheer numbers, your odds of finding somebody that you'll connect with is better than if you have a finite group that's small. Just
And
as an example.
I would be irresponsible if I didn't say it, but there are also, you can have large environments, you can have large anything, to large groups of people that is chaos. And so that's not a healthy culture either. And I'm not in any way advocating for that to just, open floodgates and say, here, let's cram as many people as we possibly can. It's for me, it's the interplay of all those variety of factors is where the magic is.
So let's move on.
Well, you're gonna be here until 10 tonight.
Any questions on what's, these have been the conversations, any questions on what's behind the recommendations from the committee on the elementary, middle, or high school pieces? If not, we'll move to the financial
Just
pieces.
let me verify what you said about 2 elementaries bid at the same time. Is that what the committee said?
That's what we recommend.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to make sure I was pulling that in.
So the financial implications of these recommendations, Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, that's right.
I think this is important to really hit because we go back to the previous, it's the high school recommendation, the previous one. I anticipate that in the days and weeks to come, we will get some feedback about people's either like or dislike of this particular recommendation. And the best that I can say really about that is, I'm really referencing number 3, is the capacity size, is I have to really reemphasize that the focus of this committee was to dig into the data that generated the capacity, both in the current numbers, but also the, you know, looking out into the 5, 6, you know, that short-term, long-term kind of look. And you know, there's a variety of pieces that, you know, we as a community can have opinions about. You know, is that the right number, or is it the wrong number? Is it large enough? Is it small enough? But I have to anchor us back into, number one, there was a very concrete set of data that was used to really get there, number one. And number two, whether we like or dislike it, in our state, the many funding formulas and factors and all that are based off of this whole concept of unhoused students. And so, you know, I could want to drive a BMW, but if that's not affordable and it's not really realistic for, you know, where we're at, then it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It's just probably not the most prudent at this time. And so that number of 700 to 900 wasn't just arbitrarily kind of pulled out of the air. It wasn't just, you know, meant to be a placeholder. It represents the trend of where numbers should be in the coming future to meet the needs of the capacity needs of our students. And that's what, so we can't lose sight of that, because I know right away the comment will come about, well, what, you know, why is that the right number? Well, it's the right number because that's what the data set generates of where our need currently is, and to maximize state assistance to minimize local impact for our taxpayers. So.
You know, though, Josh, too, you talk about it's the right amount for now. Because honestly, as we talk about the financial implications going forward, if we don't, we overbuild at that high school level, then we've got to come back and ask for more money.
We're going to have to
structure
anyway.
lower.
How many years will this get us? 20, right?
It'll get us.
It's in one of the notes.
No, I mean, because we talked about it. Go ahead.
Roughly to the length of the term of the bond. Not quite,
Yes.
about 3/4 the length of the term of
Give or take.
the bond. Thank you. Based off of current growth.
And that's what we hope to be able to do, so that we're not on top.
And that was important to the committee. That was a question.
Thank you.
Josh, I'm moving.
Yeah, you have my information.
No. So the financial implications, there was a few, just again, settling pieces. You're in a unique position, we talked about, having already passed a bond proposition of $135 million. You are eligible for SCAP funds, and that's been a piece that you asked the committee to make sure they stayed aware of, us as a consulting firm. We use these two sources of information to look at the financial limits of these projects. Similar to how we look at a district's capacity, going forward, we looked at your capacity given what you had. And then we estimated the cost of the projects with the committee. I'm going to toss over to Doug to walk through this slide in the next one.
Should I wait for Vicki to come?
Actually, yeah, I think this might be a good opportunity for us to take a short pause and a break. And we've been sitting for a couple of hours, and I also, this is kind of a critical part of the conversation, and so I'm gonna, if it's okay, Eric, that we kind of call for a little bit of a pause and a break to
Sounds great.
use your energy.
Okay, so Doug's going to walk us through this in the next slide.
In order to do high-level planning like this, we need to put in some kind of high-level cost assumptions and other numeric assumptions. And this slide contains all the assumptions that we used. One of the critical factors in doing the math is to determine how many square feet per student you need to build for a new school. And in the case of elementary school, we're using 125 square feet per student. For those of you who have been around the school construction funding assistance program, you may remember the number 90 square feet per student that they use. That has no bearing on how many square feet you really need to educate an elementary student, so you can just store that number somewhere else. And in my travels in recent years, I've seen elementary schools come in at about 125 square feet per student. I've seen as low as 95, as high as 135. So I think this is a pretty good average for planning purposes. We've already talked about the 450 student school capacity assumption. And if as a district, you decided that that number needs to be 500 students, not 450, the math is fairly simple to do. I would say in the case of an elementary school, you would simply add another 125 square feet per student and extend the math out. You get a pretty close answer to what the school would cost at a larger size. The cost per square foot in this crazy whirlwind right now is a pretty hard number to deal with. Tell you what I did. I got the OSPI's database for schools that were bid in the state in 2016 and 2017 for elementary schools. And I looked for those schools that, in fact, are you going to use a handout later, Josh, on this?
The one that you shared with me.
Yeah.
It's actually, yes, it's coming later.
Coming later, okay. So I'll tell you what I did. I took, out of that database, I took the elementary schools that were on the east side of the state and that were roughly of the size that you're contemplating here. And then I took an average of those numbers, and then I factored them up. I indexed them to 2018 dollars by escalating them 8% per year on a compound basis to today. And then, in addition to that, I escalated that number to the anticipated bid date of 2019, 2019, to get a cost per square foot for an elementary school. I triangulated that number with a professional cost estimator that I've worked with over the years in Spokane, who does most of the cost estimating for architects that design public schools in the state, and got his thinking on what's happening out in the marketplace today, because his data is a little more current than OSPI's. And he moved my number up a little bit from the OSPI algorithm that I created. We arrived at $300 a square foot. What is that number? That's the cost of a building without any soft costs. And it does not include buying any land. And it does not include doing off-site improvements like building a new road or bringing a new sewer line in or something like that you might get tagged with. And that's why we always want a contingency at the end of our program is for those kinds of costs. The high school assumptions then are a little nuanced. The 150 square feet per student for a high school of 700 to 900 students is probably about right. There are some big variables in high school area per student, however, and they depend on a couple or three factors. One is the smaller your high school gets, the higher your square foot per student will be, because you have to allocate large square footages over these students, large gymnasiums, sometimes performing arts centers, sometimes large commons areas. And in some cases you have stadiums with educational spaces in the grandstands. So this number assumes a kind of a middle of the road area per square foot for a 900 student high school. If you were to say, well, we're going to add a big performing arts center to the plan, forgot about that, we're going to add that, I would say that number, the 150 square feet, could go up a little bit. If on the other hand you were to say, we're going to build a 700 student school, not a 900 student school, I'd say your area per student would go up a little bit as well. So that's the background on that number. 900 students is what we've used in this model to calculate the cost of the school. And then the origins of the $340 a square foot is the same as I described for the elementary school. Soft costs in our world includes sales tax, design costs, building permit costs, project management, construction management, and a whole series of other kinds of consulting services that you'll run into. On the west side of the state, I use no less than 40%. It's creeping up a little bit in the Seattle area to 45%. On your side, of the state, the regulatory constraints are a little less. I've seen architects use as low as 30%. I used 38, just to be safe. And I've seen it, seen architects in Idaho use 20%. But I've been conservative to the high side on all of these numbers so that you don't end up running out of money. Then in future escalation assumptions, I'm using 10% for the next year, so up through 19. And these are bid dates, as if you were going to bid a building in 2019. 8% the next year, 5% the next year, and then 4% thereafter. Compounded. And this is, as you might guess, like predicting interest rates. If I really knew what it was going to be, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be retired somewhere. But I think, again, they are probably fairly conservative. These are numbers I'm seeing in the cost estimating industry these days. There's a footnote on this slide about what kind of a quality of building does this buy. And I tried to peg these numbers at an average level of quality, not a high-end school at Bellevue and not a low-end school somewhere that could only afford hardy plank siding. So I've tried to go right down the middle of the road on this. When you extend these numbers out, then this is the school construction assistance slide. You have two primary areas of eligibility, and both of them are in the unhoused category. By the way, you're one of the few districts I've worked with that actually has unhoused eligibility, which tells me that you really do need additional space. Because the state formula says you only need 90 square feet for an elementary student and 130 square feet for a high school student. Most school districts can't get to an unhoused situation unless they really have a lot of unhoused kids. So you're fortunate to get the money. It's unfortunate that you have so many unhoused kids. So you're getting, in this case, about $16 million in the 912 bracket. And I'm using the 2018 area cost allowance for this work. And every year, the state's area cost allowance goes up about 3%. So I think today it's $225, if I'm not mistaken, per square foot. So at 3% a year, that goes up. That'll go up $7.50 a foot or so next year. So there'll be a little upside here. And the same thing's true for the K-8. When you extend these numbers out, then using all those assumptions, this is a kind of a mock spending scenario, if you will, that the committee ended up endorsing. And it shows, again, 2 elementary schools being bid next year. It shows a 900 student school in this case. It says 700 to 900, but it's actually 900 being bid in 2020, and the renovation of the high school in that same 2020 year. We've listed just an allowance with no detail whatsoever for security and safety of $10 million. And that generates an unallocated amount at the bottom of a little over $8 million. Again, I think at this level of planning, you do want to have that balance or that contingency number there until you get into your design process. When you get into design, you always uncover problems.
Question, total amount is including state match?
Correct,
Yeah,
that's back on this
right.
slide.
The revenue includes state match. So 135 in bond funds, total of 33 in state. And what's 20? Thank you. And what's not stated here is any assumption about interest earnings from your bond proceeds.
So was there any conversation around what we're going to do if we are going to do some renovation at the high school where the suites would have?
Oh, displaced students? I don't think we got into that very far.
I do a little bit in my department.
Okay, because that's probably not something, but that's something you have to be aware of. And we did that.
We did.
Yeah.
No, I think the closest we got was before you get rid of portables, kind of to Elliot's point.
Yes. you-
Think strategically how you might need to use some. She asked about displaced students and you do high school renovations. I think the closest the committee got was, you just started selling them off if you build elementary. Do you need them in the future? So you don't have to buy new ones.
Because you gotta put the students somewhere, and I remember that when we were adding the 96, wasn't it 96,000 square feet at the high school? And it was wintered, and we had a lot of pallets and to get kids around, and it was not an easy thing.
Questions on the financial assumptions the committee used?
Yeah, I got lots.
More
comments
Can we do that another day?
Sure.
So this is the hill that I'm gonna die on, and that's how we spend our money building the schools. And I appreciate you guys being conservative when you talk about projections. I think conservative, my father and I always have a discussion about whether he's being conservative or inaccurate. And it's a debate sometimes. So obviously these numbers for the elementary school are drastically higher than what we were looking at when we had the old bond plan. And I understand where you're coming from, although I think 8% inflation compounded over your prior to this is maybe a bit high and some other things. But I sent you guys out a couple things I hope you will take the time to look at. One was a news article from about a high school that was just built in Utah. Utah's not the same market as this, but buildings are buildings in some ways. They built a 2,000 student building for, what was it, 75 million bucks. Their cost per square foot was $185. And you look at some of the other projects that are being considered right now, like in Grandview and Prosser, and they're coming in, Prosser, and this is from their architectural firm, their estimated cost is about, let's see here, 270 bucks a square foot. Prosser, which actually, they're gonna have not as many square foot per student, $302 a square foot. And so, and that's their projections for what it will cost when they go to bid in a similar time frame as ours. And that's if we choose to build a traditional high school that has all of the facilities and the stuff that you're talking about that adds square foot and cost on a per student basis. So my argument is, I think these numbers are a lot higher than they need to be, based upon how we decide to design our schools and what we decide we need in them. I see no reason for us to spend that much money if other people are able to do it for less. And then you talk about square feet per student, and I know that one thing that I am against is just making assumptions based on, when people say things like, oh, 125 square feet per student isn't enough. Well, Othello's last elementary school they built had 88 square feet per student, and they're getting the same educational outcomes that we are when we built similar schools that had another 30 square feet per student. So more square feet does not necessarily directly correlate to better outcomes, at least from what I've seen. And I'm not saying, this is a criticism of these numbers, but mostly I'm saying that to help us to question these assumptions and make sure that we're being as economical and responsible as possible as we move forward. So that's a statement. I just wanted everybody to look at those things.
How
as a point of reference.
was the number of students to faculty part of their numbers?
Yeah, that doesn't change because, class size is class size, right?
No, it doesn't.
What I'm saying is they aren't putting 40 kids in a classroom. Their elementary school class size is similar to ours. They have more classrooms because they built a 600 student school, but they have the same number of students per classroom.
Was the law in?
They built theirs and, I can tell you, hold on. Yeah. And like I said, they built their school in 2008. It was the same time that we built Park Orchard and Sage Point, and they did it for $50 a square foot less than we did. And their building is in the same condition, and you look at their grades they get, it's the same as far as how usable the building is. So we've been using an architectural firm that builds Cadillacs, and that's great if you want a Cadillac.
We had some discussion just before you joined us last fall about upping that population number from 450 to 600. Some discussion, we didn't get too far with it because we had a change in board personnel.
When did that law go into?
So it might be time to pick up that conversation again.
Yeah, and maybe like Eric was saying, maybe we look at phases
The
too.
cafeteria, the kitchen, you know,
Yeah.
the office, the ancillary parts of the school aren't particularly gonna be that much bigger to serve 600 kids versus 450, but it does, over the multiple schools, sure add up on the square footage that we're building.
And operationally too, you could argue that a lot of the fixed costs associated with the building are the same, whether it's 450 or 600, so your cost per maintenance and operations every year would be less per student as well. But, go ahead.
The law that changed what we have to have for number of students against staff in the classroom was not in '08, it was later, so.
And let me be clear, I'm not saying that we need to build a fellow school or that 88 square feet or 90 square feet is the answer. What I'm saying is I hope that we're going to challenge our assumptions every step of the way and make sure that we are being as financially responsible as possible and not just doing things because we think it's the right thing, but because we've weighed and measured all possibilities and decided that's the choice we
I'll
make.
bet if you're on
So,
the board.
comment, Eric, Becky, I appreciate your comments. And, let's see, I'm in my 47th year of doing this. 46 years of that, I've been dealing with school districts who ran out of money. They always do.
Yep.
But you're right. Buildings can be constructed and designed for less than what I'm showing you here. And I think if the district wants to, and I would recommend they do this, they can set budget targets lower than this for their architects to design to. There's no harm in that, as long as they're realistic, they're still realistic budget targets. I would also point out that Prosser hasn't bid yet, so we don't know.
And that's really what I'm getting at. If you give your architect a target of $300 a square foot, they're gonna come in at $300 a square foot.
Exactly.
If you
Or
give
it
your
does
target-
come in at 310.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm,
So Elliot, I'll say that, except for the school in Utah, I believe we actually working with all of those districts on the facility pieces. So we have planning data here, and to Doug's point, we want to shoot, the worst thing that could happen is you get really excited about our numbers and they're not tenable.
yeah.
So what we're saying is, these are starting planning numbers. The next activity would be, and what we said, before we even start to bid the elementaries, let's get detailed costing out to see how much we really have left. And I think that's where Doug's talking about, some of the details come out.
Well, I'm gonna go one step further and say that your first real opportunity to control cost isn't here. We're trying to make sure you don't run out of money. The real way to control cost is to write an intelligent and informed educational specification that guides the architects within a confined budget.
I agree completely, and I'm not trying to be critical of you guys.
No, not it.
I'm saying to the board, that's you and I are saying the same thing. When we set our targets for the people we hire to design this stuff, we need to be aggressive at that point and try to get them to be as critical as they can in ensuring that we're efficient. So.
The practical thing that does too, Elliot, is that if you start out designing a building on a wish list approach, then at some points you have to back off that wish list, and everybody's disappointed that they didn't get the higher end product. And it's nice if you can avoid that.
Yeah, we course now.
Does this reflect cost savings for two elementaries, or did you just take one elementary?
Nope, I did not discount the cost of the two schools, nor did I discount the soft cost for the two schools.
So excellent point, I guess is what we're saying.
Yeah, we're
100%.
I want to circle back around to something Doug said, and you'll hear it from me here in a few minutes when we get into my part of this, but the whole concept of educational specifications, I do have to remind us. So as we've been down this road over the last year, we did do a review of ed specs, and one of the things that Phil has helped me to be reflective about is that quite frankly, perhaps we could do a better job of that moving into the future. And what I mean by that is when this original package was put together, it was put together with the mindset of having a prototypical school from Park Orchard, Sage Point to build another one, to make some minor renovations to it and to build another one. That in itself, while it's great in theory, it kind of takes out the whole review of ed specs. Now, we did a review of ed specs with staff involved and everything, but I guess what I'm really hearing from these guys more so than probably ever before is that maybe some better ways to approach that ed specs. And Doug used the way, what phrase did you use about the educational specifications? You said something about like
Wish list.
a crisp, clean lit, or something to the, you just said it, and then
I have no idea what I just said.
It should constrain the design so that it meets your specifications and not restrictions.
And what Phil and I have had kind of side conversations throughout this process as it's developed is that what some districts have done is they've gotten to a kind of a generic ed specs, is that the right word? A prototypical ed spec, so that it's not kind of a wish list for each school, but instead it says these are our educational standards that we believe in and that we want to build
You
in.
hold the design team to those.
And hold the design
How did you
team.
meet
So,
these specifications?
In my presentation that you're hearing in a few minutes, you'll see an embedded piece for us to do that. And to Doug's point, at this point in this, estimations and assumptions is, I think, is a scenario to basically paint the illustration that there's the capacity to do these different projects, and there's some potential for us to some cost saving things from a variety of angles to pursue. It's just doing those things is the and I know I've had an opportunity. It's not just with this group, but with our community as a whole. We've often heard concern about the designs or concern about the quality of materials or the paint surfaces or the stained glass or the painted sidewalks or all those things. And so for these assumptions, we, as part of what the committee did a little bit, and then we provided is, we asked for the assumption to be kind of the average, not on the high end and not on the low end, because I personally don't think that in Moses Lake there would be a lot of support for high-end school design that would really be more expensive than this, and at the same time, I would feel irresponsible in really advocating to do everything as cheap as possible to do low-end design. And granted, we're going to grapple about that over time, but our schools are facilities for longevity, and you see the lifespan of those. And so, from my perspective, I want us to have highly functional learning spaces that are lower maintenance costs, that last the test of time. That there's a variety of factors that come into there. And so, for other people, maybe some of the cosmetic stuff is more critical or less critical. Granted, I do believe the facility, you heard me already say it, it does contribute to the part of the whole school package. I mean, if you go to school in a prison-looking building, I mean, it says something about the culture there. But that also doesn't mean that you need to go to school in MG and Grand as well. So I guess these are presented to you as kind of a starting place for the conversation, and we've
Josh,
got.
I guess they Southridge.
What? Southridge?
Yeah, I think, Josh, we felt our mandate was, if the committee's gonna recommend 2 elementary schools, safety and security, and that size of high school, is there capacity within your available funds for that recommendation to actually happen? The answer is yes. Can you do it for less than that? Yeah.
So can I propose that we maybe start thinking about this as 2 separate numbers? Like, we have a number where we're using our budgeting number, and then we have our target number, if that makes sense, because they're 2 different things, right? I'm all in favor of having the money and making sure we can afford it, but if we have our targets cost per square foot or something, that obviously should be a very different number.
Yeah, I think when you select architects, you should be prepared you should have your target numbers in place. Work with your project manager to set up those financial management logistics, because in this day and age, cost control is everything on these buildings. I mean, I can't tell you how many bad surprises there have been on bids in the state in the last 12 months. 10, 15, 18% overages on bids. And that's not to be I mean, you have to manage that like Elliot's talking about. And part of managing that is setting low but reasonable targets going in to your.
And your CM firm would have a lot of data and help you get that range.
Yeah.
That's appropriate. The design firm will always give you the range that they're willing to have.
They get paid 10%.
And they can do great work on it, right? So,
Well, Big Ben just hit that Herald.
We're short.
Well, in the hospital.
yeah, it's not uncommon. So our goal is to make sure it doesn't happen in the planning stage. Now, as you go into your next, if you choose to adopt those recommendations, then as you go to the next stage and do that cost information, that's where you'll get down to the details. So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yep, saying the same thing. One other thing I think that I want to bring up is timing. I was talking to a guy who does a lot of the bidding for one of the biggest construction firms here, actually the owner of it. And he was talking about how there can be a 20 to 30% difference between bidding in November and December and bidding in June and July.
True.
And so, obviously, we have an opportunity to be strategic in when we go to bid, and hopefully we will be wise about that.
Yeah, you have the ability to, if I do the math right, you have the ability to front fund those 2 elementary schools, which means you don't have to comply with OSPI's funding disbursement schedule, which automatically puts you into bidding in July. You can bid these on shoulder seasons and save some real money.
And just get your money, just get your back.
And Elliot, those things you're talking about, in the times that we have had bonds and sold, we have looked at, as you're going through this, we have gone through all of that. We were not out there with a bow and arrow trying to hit a target. I mean, we have pulled that in, and so while you're telling us that that's what you want to do, it's what we have been doing in the past.
Wonderful.
But we're not out there telling everybody in the community, because they don't really even care until it's all done and you say, what did you do?
Hey, I'll tell you what, that's why you have to deal with me, because you guys didn't tell me.
Well, I'm not dealing with it.
No, you don't.
Lesson learned there.
So the gentleman on the
That's what it took.
You're the one shuffling the cards, buddy.
Anything we didn't cover on the cost conversations, or anything that you feel is before we go into next steps that is important for the board to know?
I do want to mention something about the cost too, and a little bit of thinking about that.
It's 22%.
You know that a very difficult thing for our community to wrap their head around is it's the divide between what voters voted on, a 1,600 student high school, elementary school number 11, and kind of this proposal that this committee is making to you. But I do have to keep bringing us back to, you know, if we were to, and somebody could sit and do all the math or whatever, but if we were today to bring a recommendation that says, build a 1,600 student high school based off of the change of cost of construction, the escalation, all those other things, is I'm gonna, without doing the math right now, I'm gonna probably tell you is we can't afford it. So, you know, I know it's a hard concept to really grasp, and it comes back to that, you know, doing what we want to do versus what we think we can do, and this has been an ongoing, you know, over the last 6 months or so as we've grappled with this, is yes, the cost of construction, and you'll see this in my stuff coming a little bit, shows kind of that comparison of what the original bond package was built, and there were factors of escalation built in it. But unfortunately, right now we're seeing escalation factors that are much higher than originally proposed. You know, back in, this bond package at this point was put together almost 2 years ago. It put forth, you know, the board passed a resolution in November of 2016. So we're nearing 2 years ago that all this work was done. We did the symposiums when some of the original pricing was done in the spring and summer of 2016. So it was 2 years ago. So there's been a lot that has truly shifted and changed, and we can't lose sight of that in this whole process.
Well, and that's been said how many times at the board meetings?
Again and again.
And I'll say that's a parallel and complementary data point. The committee did not evaluate whether or not the capacity data drove to that number. So a larger high school wasn't contemplated. So if they both end up at the same conclusion, then 2 parallel complementary data points. Do you want to walk through this last slide?
Yeah, and actually, we could probably do it quickly and transition to my stuff because I hit all of this again. So it's, you know, I don't know if we necessarily need to double do it, but do you want me to? Basically, and I'll reemphasize at the end of mine too, is so what's next? Where do we go from here based on this recommendation? So you see some calendars of dates and things there, and I will revisit more in specifics as part of my presentation here in 18 minutes, and the steps to really get there. And then also that whole district staff component about the comprehensive instructional program. That's the bulk of what I'm really talking with you about today, and what that might look like, and really what the targets of that are before we embark on this. I will tell you that as we transition kind of out of this part and into the next part is that I am hopeful that this is a really exciting moment for us as a board, as a community, as a district, as everybody that calls Moses Lake home and that contributes to this, in that we have the potential to really do some pretty amazing things in the months and years to come, and I hope that we can find our common ground in that excitement rather than continuing to kind of kick shins about disagreement around these different topics. And we're primed and ready to do just that in some really positive, effective ways. I'm not going to lie, there's some days when I wake up and I think, why did I take this job? Just the timing of when I came into the role. And then there's other days when I think, what an awesome opportunity to be a part of as we work through this. And from really challenging times sometimes can come much better results. And it's hard in the heat of the storm to think that way, but I really do believe that as a person, and hope that we can move down that path as we move forward. So before we kind of transition from the committee's recommendation into our administrative recommendation, I want to give due credence if there's questions for either these guys can leave if they want to, or they can stick around. I'll make it optional for them for the next part of it. But questions for either of them, or
Thank you for the time that you spent. This is not easy stuff. I mean, you sit there and you drag all this in your head, and then you think about it, and then you go, well, wait a minute. So I do really appreciate the time that you have given to this. Thank you.
I was also going to say the same thing, and I appreciate the way it was handled, done more objectively, and with more data-driven kind of process with this. And I'm really excited about the recommendation. I think this is one that will help unite the community again too, since it's been so divided.
That was one of the goals of the committee that we stated from the very beginning. And that didn't keep us away from debate. We had very good debate, and sometimes we just agree to disagree. The end result is, you're looking at a recommendation. It's not any one person's opinion, but it was the result of a committee. That's what comes out of a committee is pieces and parts. But I feel good about it. The process we went through. I'm out in the community quite a bit, and I'm with people quite a bit, and I'm ready for the debates, people to kind of join together and quit fighting with each other. It's almost to the point where we don't know exactly why we're fighting. We're just fighting, and we're bringing facts in that aren't facts, and the committee got us right down to the actual facts, what the needs were. And it was interesting to see some areas we reached common ground fairly quickly, and some areas it was very divided. But we did come together at the end for fun.
Yeah, and that's good. I'm really excited about uniting the community. Moving forward with all of this.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
It's time for you to go.
Well, did you want to say anything for you?
No. I want to actually stick around because I think the most interesting part is.
You're welcome to stay.
And I want to tell you something about Steve. Steve actually has experience in curriculum, review, and he taught at the Air Force Academy. He's a PhD physicist. So he was part of their physics curriculum review and oversight, and I hope you can stick around because he would be a great resource for
Or
what you're
building
when you
something
talk
with
about.
chemical stuff.
Anyway,
I know his background,
yeah. Greg obviously
smart man.
way on top of this stuff too, as far as he's one of the people that has been on top of this situation far longer than I ever was, or most people. He's been very helpful. Thank you, guys.
And Greg brings that up. I mean, in all of our committee, these two are here, so I'll pick on them a little bit now. Is, you know, as stakeholders in this community, we all kind of have a different stake in the ground. And both of these gentlemen, and as well as everyone in the committee, had a variety of perspectives. And you know, one thing that I know and appreciate is, you know, Greg, for example, has a daughter who just graduated from high school, and he has a young son who's still an elementary school student. And so those, in this particular issue, we tend to be very divided among those different groups because there's kind of a perspective around the high school stuff and a perspective around the elementary stuff. And you know, Steve's kids have gone through this. So there's what was really cool for the committee as a whole to kind of have all those cards out on the table from all of those other, you know, variety of factors that people come from being, you know, longtime Moses Lake citizens to involved in community agencies in the community. I mean, there's a variety of personalities and experiences that's out there. So, and those, whether we like it or not, our experiences shape our perception of what those right answers are. And that's why people are so passionate about being right, because in their world, they are right. But it doesn't mean that the person next to them who completely disagrees with them is right in their world as well. So.
Well, if Dan Piper can give you a Yahoo, you got it for me.
Eric, Susan, any, before I kind of provide closure to this?
For a reason, so we're here today for a reason.
Really?
Yes, we are. Yep.
So what we're going to do then is we're going to transition, and you're going to love this, is you're going to get some more papers, and it's because it's not in the notebook yet, but it's coming. So this would be a great opportunity if you need another break real quick. We'll kind of reconvene in about 5 minutes. We'll get the technology switched over as well as things to add to your notebooks here. So, first, I have to tell you, as we dive into this part, a few years back I finished my dissertation, which ended up being somewhere around 150 pages. This isn't quite dissertation length, but it's darn close.
Yeah.
And so I want to start by first walking you through this very thick packet, just so as I reference it. We are not going to go through the whole packet today. You have
the black.
this is with my letterhead on the top. The slide deck is what we're going to go through as the presentation. And the slides will be an overview of what you're looking at. But just first, and these pages are all numbered in the upper right-hand corner, so when I make a reference to it's on page 3 or whatever, every page except the first page is numbered. So it's 70 pages long, if you're curious. So the first part of it is my memo to you as part of this administrative recommendation, and you know, just as a reminder, that the board's work exists in setting a budget, setting goals and priorities, setting policies, approving contracts in real estate. My job, where it often falls, is in the realm of making it all happen. And obviously I don't do that by myself, but I have the opportunity to work with our internal team to really make things happen. And so this administrative recommendation, for no other reason think of it as this, think of it as my kind of next steps in kind of pulling this all together and from a variety of perspectives. So the long letter first, you can read that. It's a lot of, for lack of better terms, it's a lot of legal explanation about the process, about what we've been through, kind of going. And then there's a series of appendixes or tabs that follow, and that's where the bulk of all this comes from. And so if you go in about 6 pages, actually it starts on page 6. There is the first one of it is a whole tab about updated current and projected student enrollment. Some of this is repetitive because you've already seen it from the other things. The reason you have it all in this document is that as we embark on this process, we want to also ensure that we are doing everything thorough and to the letter of the law and intent. And so one of those things is to provide it in here. So the first tab is updated current and student enrollment. If you flip to page 16, these are some specifics, both historical and current, about the cost escalation that we've experienced. So it gives you the actual numbers. for Eric and Susan and Vicki, this first page on page 17 will look familiar. It was really our bond package pricing before how we got to those dollar amounts. You know, when we said a high school was going to cost X dollars, here's the breakdown of it. You also see in there the escalation factors that were planned for at the time. And then starting on pages 18 and 19, you see that supporting data that Doug was just talking about the different costs of construction and where they got those particular items. So I just want to, we're not going to go through all this. Tab 3, you already heard a little bit about the whole call as part of this recommendation for safety and security updates, and you're going to hear me talk specifically about what that means. And this starts on page 20.
See, this is.
So tab 3 of page 20 is all information about the ESD safety and security audits, a process that Dave is leading for us and we're about to embark on, and how it drives and informs the work. We've done one school, and Susan and Vicki and Dave were part of that when we did it for Moses Lake High School, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. So you have a copy of what that audit pieces include, as well as the data coming back from the high school at the presentation you've seen before. Skip all the way to page 33. This is the exact replica, so I won't even make you really look at it, but it's another copy of the committee's recommendation.
Somebody has their lights on a maroon little car out here.
What would be mine? Is it ruby colored?
Yeah, it's a ruby, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't want her battery to be dead when she got out here. Sorry, Josh.
No worries. And then probably the most, my most favorite part of this whole package, not really, is starting on page 40 for the next 30 pages. One of our responsibilities is to document the additional community input that we had around this topic. And so you see in there, thank you Sylvia, she had the task of assisting me with this. You see minutes from all of the board comments that have happened over the last 20 months, copies of letters that have been received, and so it is all here for you to read and review.
Josh, you're so sick.
Did you say you were having trouble sleeping, Vicki? That will help.
Trust me, this is not something I'm going to be reading at night.
Well, Sylvia had the fun job of going back into old minutes and finding all
So
of
you
it.
can tell me when the article was in the newspaper,
It's in there.
the second one, when the teacher got posted.
Yeah, it's in GPA.
All right, good.
So with that, let me dive in. So you have that. Please put it in your notebook. Occasionally at points in this, I may make reference to it. For me, well, this document is very important. It has lots of stuff for you. I couldn't begin to even figure out how we were going to look at this together. And so this slide deck is really, think of it as kind of an executive summary of what's in there, but also some additional pieces that are further fleshed out. So now I'm flipping over to the slide deck, which looks like this. So you have this handout. You can follow on there or watch on the screen. So this is a paragraph right out of that memo that's there. And I highlighted it in orange certain text that I think is really important for you. So why are we doing this? Why am I giving you administrative recommendation? Why don't we just take the committee's recommendation and kind of let that chew? And really it's, in this, from a legal sense and from a practical sense, is I have the opportunity to, again, facilitate this work with the district, but also I have a responsibility as I serve you as the secretary to the board to make sure that the actions that we're doing are supportable, that they're legal, that they're within the realms of what you can do. I get the opportunity to kind of throw up a red flag to you if you're walking down a path you shouldn't. But so this paragraph, and I just want to, I'd like you to take a second and just read it. I mean, you can read it right out of the handout or up on the screen, but I'd like you to read it paying close attention to the words in orange. going in teacher mode here, so you just get to play along. So who would like to tell me what that meant to them as they read it?
That's called keep us out of jail card.
Keep us out of jail card? What else?
Conditions have changed.
So there's a statement in there, it's, I think it's the third sentence or second sentence that says, this memorandum recommends that it's in the best interest of the district and its students and residents for the board of directors to exercise its discretion to alter specific expenditures because of some of those changes. And we're gonna review that and talk a little bit. So the purpose of this recommendation is to not only explain to you what your legal guidance is, you know, what you have the authority to do, but also what our administrative recommendation is on behalf of myself in moving forward with this, and then start to talk about the practical application of it. So today in this recommendation, we're gonna do a couple things. We're gonna talk about kind of the theory behind this recommendation, and there's some things that I need to be crystal clear about as we go in, so you don't kind of wonder where I'm coming from with that. And then we're gonna talk specifically about the recommendations that you just heard coming from the committee in regards to the elementary schools, the safety and security, and the bulk of this will be focused around the high school, because I think you should be left feeling from our presentation before is that there is the bulk of the work to be done around the high school and that comprehensive educational program review and things like that. So in diving in there, these are things, and I'm not asking you at this point to necessarily support or endorse these. These are just, this entire, for the next hour that we're together talking about these, I need to be clear about how I approach this. Because if these aren't true, then you're gonna maybe feel like this is a little bit of an off base of a recommendation. So the first one of those assumptions in my theory is that you commissioned the work of the Long Range Facility Master Planning Team and you endorse their work, and that you should give credence to that work based both on the process and the careful development among the group of critical thinkers. You'll notice in that I did not say that you just blanketly rubber stamp that and just don't think about it. What I'm saying in there is, I hope, and I can tell already by your investment in today's time and the questions you've asked and the processing that you're doing just that. But I think it would be a huge error for us as a district and as a community and as a committee just to take that and say, well, thank you, committee, but we're gonna keep doing something else. I think that would be a big mistake, and I have to be clear in saying that to you. But I think there's some critical thought that needs to come among all of you in discussion in the coming weeks. The second one of those is, and this is, I kind of ended the committee presentation by saying this, is I am very much of the mindset that for the well-being of our student, staff, and the community, is that now's the time for us to move forward with this work and to do just this and to take these next steps. Greg used an example or a phrase that he continues to maybe find himself in disagreement with our community members and other people that are, and we've kind of lost sight of what we're arguing about, is and I've heard this a lot from all 5 of you actually over the past several months about the desire to move forward and for our community to heal and I think this is what our solution is to get some of that work going. And the final one of those is, and I will tell you this was an element of surprise for me, and I think you probably should also feel that, and we have some continued work to do. And when we started the Long Range Facility Master Planning Team, we had a goal of really having both kind of a short-term and a long-term plan. And the long-term plan is still, you saw certain elements of it, but it's still yet to come in some ways. And so our primary focus was on the short-term stuff. And so I want to be clear today that as we talk about this, most of it's about the short-term and really the bond projects that we have sitting in front of us. This, again, is a review of those tabs that are in the full document for your review. You ultimately have a decision to make to determine, the way the law reads is basically that if the board of directors deems that a change of state and local circumstances has occurred, that you may alter the bond expenditures. And so this recommendation that we're bringing for you today, or my recommendation for you, has all the documentation around these 5 factors from our updated enrollment, the cost escalation information, what's happening, and I know in this particular recommendation, it's focused very much on the audit process, but I do think it's safe to say that in the last 20 months, we're experiencing some different elements with school violence and safety than we've ever had before. And not that they're new issues, but they certainly continue to grow and develop, and so that's where the safety and security part comes. And then the committee recommendation, and then all additional community input. So that's a review of the tabs we already looked at. Those are the tabs 1 through 5. So let's get right to it in diving into the elementary school recommendation. So when I say the elementary school recommendation, this part now from this point forward is my recommendation to you. You ultimately make some of these decisions of what to do next, and this is what I'm kind of proposing to you, and I am confident that we will have lots of conversation in the days to come about this. You're not making any decisions today anyway, but this is just, I'm being clear about my vision behind this is, the first of those bullets is that my recommendation would be that you do adopt the committee's recommendation to construct the 2 new elementary schools. The second of that is, and part of that is because I know that this particular change, one elementary school was always in the package, and the shift to 2, we had a chance to talk about it a lot today. I think it does align with the space needs. It aligns with the programming needs that we've talked about, and it's responsive to our enrollment trends. And I think we all have to be realistic to know that we're not going to be able to do everything that maybe we need to do at one time. I mean, that's the work of a school district for years, and so this is kind of the first step of many steps to come over time. But I think this particular recommendation that sits there is the right one moving forward. And I also have to re-emphasize, because I probably, our team will be facilitating most of those, is that we do see the efficiencies around planning, redistricting. So for example, I just want to remind us that if you were to adopt 2 elementary schools, for example, and you do one year and one the next year or 1 2 years down the road, what that really means is we would repeat what we had to do before, where we go through a round of elementary redistricting where we move 10 attendance areas into 11. The process that we have defined, and it works really well, I'm not going to lie about that, the board developed it several years ago, it's using all software, is it takes about a year to really get through. By the time you come up with the drawings, you have community input, all the different steps. So what would really happen, and I need to stress this with you, if we open one school 1 year and one the next year, we basically would open a school and then start the next process, maybe even before the next school opens. Even if it's 2 years, this particular topic is very disruptive for the community. I'm just going to tell you that. And so if we had an opportunity to be opening 2 of them at the same time, we could actually do that in one step, and really go from 10 to 12 elementaries at that same time. Obviously it's a lot more than just what makes it the most efficient, but I have to advocate that way. And then also the planning, architectural, and engineering efficiencies is it would really afford us the opportunity to, rather than kind of go through 2 cycles of that, to do it all at one time, where you're really planning and designing an elementary school that would be built in 2 different locations. Yes, Vicki?
Are you comfortable with our policy on redistricting? You looked at that?
I off the top of my head, yes, I don't have any major red flags with it. I think it would be healthy, especially with all of you except you having not gone through that, for us to review it and understand what it really means. The policy as it is written right now has kind of some guidelines of things that we want to try to accomplish, like balanced demographics, close proximity to schools, feeder patterns and things. And so what it really does, I think it'd be healthy for us to review, are those still the right priorities for us to really focus on? But I think yes, it's...
Okay, because we picked that up at a national conference from Florida, someplace that was at.
And what has changed since the last time is for Park Orchard and Sage Point, the software we used was antiquated. You almost had to plug in every kid. We now have very robust software that you can literally sit there in a work session, draw lines and see, what those balances would do and what the feeder patterns are. It's a very cool system. We actually purchased it in preparation for the 2017 bond, so it's been sitting unused for a little while. So
It's old now.
no, we keep renewing it. So it's well worth it. And we've actually used it for other things. It helps us with transportation flow. It helps us with understanding. One thing that we did last year about this time is we were really considering out of service area kids. So you can actually pull up a map, and every elementary school is coded, and so you can see where kids that have a residential area address in one elementary school that are attending another. And it was very fascinating to see where kids that are going to certain schools, where they're coming from. So it has a lot more use than just redistricting, but for redistricting, we haven't had an opportunity to use it yet. Timing around this. I feel strongly, and it's not just because he's still sitting here and didn't leave with his buddy Doug, but I am going to agree with Phil that I strongly believe that we should, at a minimum, conduct a review of the educational specifications for our new elementary schools, or even consider, and I hate to say this because it always feels like it's stepped backwards, but I want to make sure we're doing the right work moving forward, is to draft those prototypical ed specs that we had. And one of the things that, and Phil didn't, he mentioned it, but he didn't really articulate on it. So in our functional adequacy information that we went through as a committee, one of the things that came out of there is that a lot of elementary schools of today are being built with an art room where students go to do art. It's not done in a regular classroom. Sometimes it's delivered through an art specialist. And so in the initial scoring round, we scored low in that because none of our elementary schools have that. But we had a conversation and said, well, that's not really one of our current educational programs. That's not how we deliver art. But I think the important step for us moving forward is to really get crystal clear on what are those things that we're doing that are priorities that drive the space and the program needs, versus you kind of doing it in reverse and having the space and say, how can we make the program fit in there? And that's going to be a reoccurring theme that you're going to hear from me in the high school part of this too. So I would propose we start that right away. And then we get to working on the review of those educational specifications. I have lots of specifics about how that might look to be done a little differently, but I'll save that for then, because ultimately you have to take some action on this before any of that gets put into place. Obviously, with the selection of, or with the recommendation for 2 elementary schools, is that you would have to go through to ensure that we have both acquired and that you've selected 2 sites. I would also propose to that as we've been working around that topic, and we have a previously selected site, and there's a variety of factors, but I'm going to tell you, we need to lean on the data, and that software that I'm talking about, I think could be a really helpful tool for us as you potentially make land purchase decisions where some of those needs are based on our enrollment trends. And so that, I think, would need to be done this fall. At the same time, this is where, and we're not really prepared today to kind of talk about what it is, because again, we're not making decisions, but if the outcome of that educational specifications drives major change to the design or significant change to the design, we really need to have a process for doing just that. Even if it doesn't, I am confident that we need to go through a process for reviewing it for efficiency and perhaps focusing on, so let me say this, if the outcome of that educational specifications process was that the design that's sitting kind of on the shelf right now for elementary school number 11 that was done, if the outcome of that is that fully meets our ed specs, then at a minimum what we would need to do is to go through all the design work to ensure that we're getting the most for our dollar that we possibly can. And I know even for those of you that were on the board at the time, so for some of you weren't on the board yet when we were kind of going through that. For the rest of you, I know that part kind of got rushed through the entire, when we were doing this, would have been about this time last year, is all of a sudden, I know it was kind of catching you off guard because you were getting kind of ed specs documents thrown in front of you for your approval, and they hadn't necessarily been as studied maybe as thoroughly as as we would. So I want us to be careful about that. And that efficiency review, I think could result in cost savings. It could result in perhaps some areas of design. Now, that does bring with it a risk of getting too deep into the weeds, but at the same time, it is important. Then that would prepare us for early next year, meaning calendar year next year. When you talk about that ideal bid market, and I wish Doug were still here, but most of the advice usually is to try and send things out to bid in the winter months, especially right after the first of the year. And so I think our target should be to have these projects ready to go to bid this coming January, to really make it early in 2019. Maybe it's February, but to really target having that, to keep us on a time frame that would have elementary school number 11 and 12 opening, and I really wish that would go away, in the fall of 2020. It is an aggressive calendar in one way and not in another, but I also want to remind us, you'll see this both in the high school and in this one, that all of these dates are really a 1-year delay from the original intent of the bond package. And I think with the amount of time that's passed since February 14th, 2017 to today, the fact that we might have only lost a year in that is better than what we could be, is what I'm really saying. So we also have, particularly, and I want to remind us of this at the elementary level, is we have some, and they didn't get into it today, although it is in some of the functional adequacy, is we've got some temporary solutions, such as Camp 5, the 5th graders from Garden Heights that are sitting over at Chief Mo, that were never intended to be long-term solutions. They were really intended to get us from today at the time to the opening of a new elementary school. And we've got to be prepared to either terminate those solutions and do something else, or have the kids in permanent space at a certain point. And that's just one of several of them. And so that would be my proposed timeline for the elementary recommendations. Questions about this so far? Anything related to elementary school? All right, let's move on to the safety and security part. This one is actually a little bit more concise, just because. So we are scheduled already so even if you don't accept this recommendation, we're moving forward with this next piece anyway, is that this summer, actually Dave will be leading with representatives from the ESD, the complete ESD safety and security audit for all of our schools. It will be conducted on August 14th and 15th, I think, is that right? Yes. And you have copies of that in your administrative recommendation. And so my recommendation is based on that, is that we complete that, and from that, then we generate a list of priorities of where the highest needs are across the district for what are safety and security improvements. And I'll say this going in from the beginning, is that I fully anticipate that the difference between a want and a wish list and what's feasible, there's going to be a vast difference, because I know, for example, that one of the things that's going to come out is, well, we want to enclose all the hallways at all of our 8 elementaries. That is not feasible at 8 elementaries with $10 million. So we're going to have to be very strategic in what does that prioritized list look like? What are the most research-based solutions to really improve the safety and security? And also, while we have 8 elementaries that were all designed during the same generation, they have some very vast differences in how traffic flows through their schools. So there's some of our schools where parent pickup is about 6 steps away from a classroom door. So in my opinion, that has a little bit different priority than one who may have a crack in the sidewalk. And so there's some differences that are going to really come out as a result of this. But that prioritized list would be the next step from there. Really using the filter that our revisions have to be in the best interest of students and staff safety, but also realistic in their approach, and for modification to existing school design. We're not going to be able to turn Garden Heights into Sage Point. That's the bottom line. And I know that there may be some attempts to really try and over that. And it's also, there's a finite amount in the budget, and there's a line item in there that we're going to have to prioritize and work through. The timing of all of that, you're going to start to see here from me is some cabinet responsibilities around this. And so you see a major undertaking for Dave here, in that we would complete that in August, and that really this fall would be all the work about reviewing it for the highest needs and efficiencies, and then really spend this early winter working on what it would take to actually do the work. There's a difference between identifying if there's a problem and actually getting it to design and actually getting it done. And I will tell you, while I appreciate greatly your support, and we're working our best to really get it done with the high school safety and security upgrades and improvements that are happening, is we're under really, in our work and in the public sector, we're under kind of unreasonable timelines. I'm going to be honest with you, to go from talking about it to getting it drafted and we're working with, we get the opportunity to work with a lot of different public agencies and entities to pull it all together. So I think this is a more realistic time frame to make some of those things happen. And then I put it as the start of the work next summer, because depending on the work, it may not all be able to be done in one summer. It might be done over a couple of summers or spring breaks, or depending on what the recommendations really are. I don't want to preempt that. So questions about that? I purposely talked very quickly through all of that because that's what I would kind of label as the easy part of this. This next part, well, it's the harder part, I'm going to be honest and tell you, is it's the part that I get the most passionate about and excited about. And it's not just because I'm a former high school person, but I also think this is our greatest opportunity to build a better tomorrow for our kids. And so you see this that we've identified is this whole concept of high schools of the future, building a better tomorrow. And I want to set this up, and when I do all of this, I'm not doing this in any way to say that we're a broken system that has failed. But what I'm saying is we are a system that we have a great opportunity for improvement and a better tomorrow. Several years ago, I think it was about 2010-ish, we set this as our district mission statement, our vision statement, that by 2017 we'd have 100% of our students will be confident learners, meeting expected benchmarks to become college and career ready. And we know it was a stretch goal to go from where we were at in 2010 to get to 100%. Was a huge undertaking. But at the time, we set out as a district that said, we're going to do this. We're going to do everything within our power to make this a reality. And whether we fell short of that or not, what I'm really telling you is, I don't know that many of us can argue that say that we should build a target that says, we're going to target that 90% of our students are and leave the other 10% behind. So this will continue to be a target and a push for us, is that we get there. This chart I threw together for our conversation today. If you kind of put this quantitatively, if our target goal is 100% and you look at our on-time graduation rates over the last 14 years, you'll see that we have made, that trend line is generally positive. It goes that direction. We have made improvements. You see little dips in certain years. If you ask school staff why that is, they could probably tell you some specific names of why those years were really rough years. But I will also tell you that the state has changed the formula for calculation several times, but this is the most consistent one, is this would be the on-time graduation rate. So, and these are graduation years. So when you look at the class, the 2016, that would be the class of 2016. So 74% of them that started as ninth graders graduated 4 years later. So we have made, it is an accurate statement to say we've made progress. However, it's also an accurate statement to say we still have a lot of work to do. We should not be content with, 75% efficiency or 75% of our students making that target. Yes?
When did alternative school, when did that close?
2013 or 14.
So I did 3 years, so it's been 17, 16, 15.
So 2014 was the last year they were open?
Right. Spring
And
of
we didn't keep that cohort separate?
We
when
did.
brought them up?
As far as tracking,
Hmm?
we did, when the entity closed, we had to merge them with Moses Lake High School. We could hand track them. These numbers, just so you know, are district numbers, not just Moses Lake High School. So they include both, prior to 2014, they would include both Columbia Basin Secondary School and Moses Lake High School. So, and I intentionally did that because especially because in 2014, when they all became one population anyway, they're all our students. And
So how does that work with our special needs kids? Because they can go into our 21.
so there are,
What is that here?
they are not, they don't count negatively into that formula because of provisions that allow them for extended graduation dates. Some students that are served, if they have IEP goals and that extend beyond the traditional age 18, they can be in school till age 21. And so they really don't calculate into that very drastically.
Did you see that in our new thing from Boston? What they're doing over at Clover Park? Oh my gosh. It's amazing, honestly amazing. I might be so impressed with it.
And well, for those of you that I've had an opportunity to talk with, is this particular chart and the work around on-time graduation is something that I'm very passionate about. At the same time, what really takes it to this next step of how it kind of informs some of this process is, I am 100% confident in saying we have worked our butts off, from the classroom teacher to the counselors to the in the boardroom to the community to try and change this trend. And unfortunately, despite all of that work, I think while we're making some progress, we still feel like we've got a lot more to really do. So that's going to be part of where this is kind of embedded in all this. I figured, especially because we've been sitting here for 3 hours and 20 minutes at this point, think of this through the lens, though, of our educational system. So they can turn this up. I'm going to restart it. Yeah, it's all district students.
I'm not seeing that option.
The volume.
Like the audio settings, mic settings. You don't want the mics up.
You know what? It might be.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody in there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
No, that's it. Yeah.
So I share that with you because when we just talked about all the things that we are doing, is I have to wonder how much of us are stuck on an escalator. How much of us are, we're working very hard at doing what we know. And this may seem like an odd conversation to have, but I wanted to tie it back to our, talk about construction and planning and moving forward is when we focus on, repairing the escalator, maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe we're asking the wrong approach of what it really takes. When we look at our system, and and I know I didn't fit everything on here because there wasn't room. We have a ton of high school programming that happens to meet the needs of our students. So we have Moses Lake High School, we have CV Tech, we have Career Tech Ed within Moses Lake High School, we have SkillSource, we have AP, we have Running Start, we've now invested in one-to-one technology. We've got this focus going with some STEM stuff. We have digital that serves kids through an online environment. We have now our High School 21 partnership. We have our partner agencies like Job Corps, Youth Academy, etc. I'm going to make an argument that our athletics and extracurricular activities are a huge part of the programming that we deliver to students, and they serve a purpose. We have AVID. We have the arts. And this is a great list, and I know that sometimes it doesn't feel like the list is as concise as it might be. And part of that is I'm going to make the argument is that we've got all these separate systems that are kind of happening and playing throughout, and they're all serving needs of kids, and they're all very positive things. There's not one thing on that list that isn't a great thing for kids in our district, but how are they all connecting? What are we really doing from an educational program? And the problem, if we don't answer that question, is that we run the risk of that one of these in particular starts to be the driving force behind high school design. So for example, if all of a sudden we say, oh, what we need best is we need to really focus on the arts, or we need to really focus on AP, or we need to really focus on technology, then all of a sudden we're going down this path. We're going up the escalator, and that's where we're going. And we have to be very cautious about that, not only to not leave the others behind. But I don't have all the research or all the answers, but I'm going to tell you there's a lot of interconnectivity and play among all of these. And our challenge is to figure out what they are and how to provide the synergy in our system to not only do what we're doing at a better level, but to also find ways that how we can overcome that still 25% graduation gap that we have. And this excites me because there's been a lot of work over time that have put all of these things into place. And many of you have watched them, some of you have been a part of them, some of you have had your children go through them, and they're all amazing things. But we have this unique opportunity, and when I'm out and about and I'm talking about what's cool at Moses Lake is I can really say that we have something for everybody. But then right after I say that, the thought process in my mind is, but do we really? So, go ahead.
Bob Hughes has done a lot of that work with those that are financially kind of in the bottom part, and that is just like what they're not getting in school, or what we are not able to give them, is so connected to the family's finances. It is absolutely all over the country.
Yeah.
It is absolutely, and I noticed that one of the schools in Idaho they're suing the schools because kids have to pay to get in there with their supplies, a whole lot of things. Now, is that the answer? No, but Bob Hughes has done a lot of stuff, and then this Clover Park that I was reading was kids are graduating at age 21, which wouldn't help this because the state cuts you off. But what do we want from these kids? Do we want them to graduate?
100% of our students, yeah.
Yes, and be productive.
And that's exactly where, and I don't know that, educational programming is the right word. I'm going to say that's going to be our placeholder for now for our working definition around that. But my recommendation in all of this is that we have to get clear on that. And I want to dive right into there because it's a self-criticism, and granted, a big chunk of this happened early in my career here, meaning last July. But traditional kind of school design and programming is we set down on a path, and this is what our path is that we really did. So we started by developing educational specifications. So we with our design team sat down and we said, well, what are the spaces we needed? What are important elements? Where should the spaces be? What must be located in each other? And how large should each space be? So let me just ask you, when we started that, and some of you weren't sitting at the table, but where did our opinions come from around that topic? Okay. A, it came from staff. Primarily it was coming from staff.
Where were the students and the parents?
Okay. There probably was a lacking student parent voice, but where else? What experiences do you think were informing that?
What we're already doing.
What we're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you hands down, is that what it felt like, and I'm being critical of the process, I'm not being critical of the players involved, I'm not being critical of anything else, because I was one of those players, is that really what we were doing is we were taking Moses Lake High School to the detail shop, and we were trying to build another one of those, tweaking and fixing the pieces. That then started to, and this would be the next phase, and this is where we kind of hit pause, is then it starts to get into those educational specifications then become the design of the building. So it becomes, the construction plans, the materials, and the site development, and then it actually gets built. And I want us to be cautious that as we move forward, that we don't just seek out to build another Moses Lake High School. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with Moses Lake High School, but if I'm being true to the fact that we can dream for a better tomorrow for our kids than we have today, then something has to be flushed out in this. And the time to do that is not during design and development. The time to do that is not during construction. The time to do that really isn't even during ed specs. And so that's where this whole, and it becomes the foundational piece beyond this, or below this, is the whole educational programming and visioning. That we have to get to the place where we become clear in what it is that we want, what that educational program is, and that make those be the drivers behind those ed specs, and that ultimately then gets to design and construction. And I will tell you, it often felt like a mismatch, because when we dive right into getting to the ed specs, we've missed that opportunity to really talk about anything without fully knowing where we're at. And it got, and I'm looking at Kathy because she was part of that team, is you start to it gets heated, because all of a sudden what it really becomes is a whole group of people kind of advocating for their piece of the pie. What they want for their program, or what they believe is right for kids, or what, and those are great conversations to have. I just think they're misplaced conversations to be having. It shouldn't be happening in the ed specs process. It should really be happening before. So questions about this slide, and I'm gonna keep shoving this down your throat again and again, because it's really re-emphasizing, especially that foundational, the blue piece in the bottom of what this is really all about. And I also would tell you that this particular piece is where it really kind of put a little bit of a hand grenade in the committee, because when that's not defined, it's really hard beyond a capacity number to really start to talk about those things, because that's a missing element. What are we really doing? Are we really comfortable that building another comprehensive high school that has the kind of wide approach to it, is that the best for us? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But before we start to say that and design one, we better get crystal clear on it, because these are long-term facilities. I mean, somebody, and Moses Lake High School was originally constructed in its current site in 1956, or somewhere around that neighborhood. I think it's the 59.
50s, right?
So somebody at some point, they did this same process. They went through ed specs and they designed it and built it with a vision in mind of where it's going to be. And 50 years from now, or 60 years from now, when the people that replace all of us, you'll probably still be working, but
Well, I'll be gone, but that's okay. No way, you'll be so excited.
He'll still be here. So, is that we can firmly say that this is what it's really about. Last week I had this was kind of like, I sometimes believe that, I'll say it. I sometimes believe God works in ways to really speak to me. And last week I was sitting at an Avid thing, and actually was sitting next to Vicki, and there was a whole lot of conversation about career and college and life readiness. And it was like, and I'll be honest with you, I was kind of, it was at a really busy day. I have a lot happening in my personal life with my children right now. And the thought of going to Seattle and back all in a day it was killing me. But when I sat there, it became clear to me is that, that was one piece of what I needed to hear right now, in this particular piece chipping away at how we have to really get there. And not that it was the whole answer that we just go out and build an avid high school, but you know what? We better have some thoughts and ideas around how it fits, how that puzzle piece all fits together, so we don't continue the path of having just these disconnected pieces where we hope that every kid kind of fits in one of the holes.
The why.
What?
The why.
The why.
The why.
So, and this is just a start. Obviously, you know, this high school visioning process hasn't even happened yet. But what are some of those critical questions that I think need to be flushed out through there? You know, what's the best way to reach all students with comprehensive high school program across multiple schools and educational offerings? You know, there is a place, and I'm going to be the first to tell you, you know, I am a product of, and quite honestly, I enjoyed it. I had a great high school experience. I know many of our students have a great home. So there is a time and a place and the type of students that thrive very well in large comprehensive high schools. And I think we have to stay true to that. That's part of what's on our delivery model. I also know that there are students who thrive and do really well at Running Start. I know there's kids who thrive and do really well on online learning. I know there's kids who thrive and do really well at CB10. And so connecting all those pieces and how they all come together, and maybe even things that we're missing the boat on. A hard part of this question is going to be, you know, what are those internal structures of traditional high schools that hinder our student success? To be reflective at that level and to really say, is it policies? Are they graduation requirements? Are they expectations? And Vicki Groff and I have had an opportunity over the last couple of years to really get started with it, and this I think only re-energizes the process. I believe firmly at the core of me that we do a disservice to students when we have a one-size-fits-all graduation requirement set. And we have the ear of the right people to really help inform some of that change. I really do believe that. You know, we have local representatives who agree with the same mentality. We have to be leaders and facilitators of that change, because if we don't, we'll just keep recycling. We'll go back on the escalator and redesign another of the same thing. What must 21st century high schools do to truly ensure that students are career, college, and life ready? Vicki, I'm gonna pick on her a little bit because I can, and she's sitting way over there, she can't hit me. And I actually agree with her, so I'm picking on her just because it's easier. When people throw out those buzzwords, I struggle with it. And this is why I struggle with it. Often, and especially like in the AVID world, for example, they'll use the phrase to be college ready. And where I struggle with this is, I'm much better with the list like that says career and college and life ready, because I think it really truly honors them as equals, that they are all successful life paths for the individual that's there. And then, you know, being the child of two non-college graduates, I know that they have had success enjoying their life, and that doesn't mean that they were the most successful, but they left high school life ready, and they started raising a kid. I mean, I think there is value to all of these things. But what I struggle with this question more is about, you know, what do those really mean? Are they just kind of statements that are plugged up on a wall that some educational researcher said, you know, this is what it takes to be life ready, or this is what it takes to be career college ready? And I think we have an opportunity to really get clear about that, but also then to have our educational programming, especially at the high school level, to align to those pieces that drive that and inform that practice. And this is kind of going to what Vicki was just sharing about, you know, the Clover Parks of the world and stuff, but there are a lot of really innovative things that are happening out there in other districts, states, and countries. I know in the break you guys were talking a little bit about some other countries and their educational systems, and I think we are ignorant to just ignore those, to say, oh, you know, we're just going to keep doing this, expecting a different result. What are the outcomes from that educational programming vision? Number one is it would end in a time when it would give you recommendations for board action for things like siting and design of our entire high school system. You see why this is such a critical piece now, that the committee's recommendation is just really on size, but that until all these things get kind of all ironed out, it would be premature for us to say, oh, the school's happening on this site or this site or this site, because depending on the program design, it could vary greatly in what's the most efficient way to deliver that. It would result in a comprehensive plan for meeting the diverse needs and changing needs of students that think beyond the norm. We I'm excited about that, just because, I won't go into that whole issue right now, but I think it's really exciting work for us to consider that, honestly, what if we rethought high school a little bit? What if we really said, you know, we value and trust the investment, the resources, the awesome community that we have here, and we're going to get really clear about this. It would then launch into the design for this new facility, and also then at the same time drive the renovation work that what needs to be done to Moses Lake High School. Before we were approaching, especially the renovations to Moses Lake High School, more out of kind of physical needs, you know, heating and air conditioning, and those may still be the reality. But if we're going, for example, one of the things that kept coming up in there is that, well, we really need to improve our science space. Well, we better get clear about what that really means. And does improved science space mean more space? Does it mean more technology? Does it mean opportunity for students to collaborate? Does it mean hands-on environments? Does it mean approaching science in different ways beyond kind of traditional biology, physical science? I mean, so I would hesitate, I would hate for us to just say, we're investing, you know, X number of $1 million to improve facilities without really knowing what our goal and outcome is of making those improvements and how we can anchor it in something.
You think about our special needs teachers that we've had. And one of those young ladies that was one of the students, she has special needs. She was a page of weekly legislature. She went on her first plane ride to California by herself. She's been named the Princess something for the state. She's gone way far. She's very high functioning.
She broke the norm of what was expected.
Absolutely, because of what we're doing in that classroom. It's absolutely amazing.
Dave, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, and I'm going to misquote it, so I'm going to see if you can remember it. There's several years ago, we heard an avid young lady that talked about a quote like, don't tell me what.
It's found in Vision. Never tell me the sky is the limit when there are footprints on the And she was a Nigerian student who migrated to Chicago area. Yeah, we heard that, and so it's on a big, I had Melanie make it for me, it's on the wall now.
And while I couldn't put the words quite together, I so eloquent, as this has been flushing through and as the process and getting together for today and everything, that quote in broken form kind of kept rehashing through in my mind is, we in some ways, but some of our structures, and this isn't a personal thing, it's structures and other things, we've set the bar of where the sky is. And we've said, this is what we expect of you, jump over. And I'm hopeful that we can change some of that. Let me keep going here. So the timeline for these particular recommendations is, again, starting now. We would kick off this work with High Schools of the Future Educational Programming and Visioning. He doesn't know this yet, although we've kind of prematurely talked about it.
Josh, are you going to be involved, you had that whole collage of entities before, are you going to be involved in all of them in that?
They have to be on the table for conversation. I mean, to be honest with you, some of them are out of our control. Like we don't get to control what Job Corps does and all those things. But my question would be,
So you need participants, is what I'm asking.
yeah, I think they have to be part of the conversation piece of looking at this big umbrella of comprehensive high school programming, how it all comes together, as well as, you know, community. And Ellie was talking about Steve's experience in doing some of these things, but it has to be much broader in developing that than just saying, well, this is what we currently do, so we need to find a place for all of these things.
You know what I saw at Frontier at math? I went up there. 7th graders are sitting there in teams, and the teachers got them going through some things to see who's going to win. Have you ever thought about walking into a math class and the kids are so excited that they are yelling and happy and, oh, look, we're ahead and this, and they were giggling, and I thought, I wish math would have been that way when I was there. I mean, it was different. The whole culture was different. And they were working together in teaming. They were also learning things that they could be using in high school as well for math. And then I went into the library, and they were coding how to code a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's what the kids were learning how to do, and you're going, but that was the very start of what they're gonna be doing if they're in anything, doing things with computers and going into robotics.
And we have across our system, I think we have a lot of great lighthouse examples like that. You know, there isn't a day that I don't walk into CB Tech and have an interaction with some of the students and their excitement about their learning. And I'm getting too old now, but there was a time and a place when many of the students that went to CB Tech, I was also their high school principal. And so I saw the side of them that what traditional school, how they thrived or failed. And then I would go there and it was like a whole different person. And now I'm at that point where I don't know the kids as well, unfortunately, but and so I think there's something to be learned from all of those things, of what are we doing that's different. Yes.
One thing I think, I don't know if we can call this something more expansive than just educational programming, but you mentioned CB Tech, and I think our culture and how the norms that we set play a big part in whether the kids are successful. And I don't know if that's an educational program thing, but I think that's something also that we need to.
Are you talking about like the norms of dress code and respect and handshaking? And,
yeah, that kind of thing. So
there's something about that. There's something culturally in that school that is driving some facts around why that works and how that is effective. And I will. There's been great examples, and we've all seen them and dealt with them over the years of kids that absolutely blossom. You know, I've had an opportunity is 4 times a year, Dave and I sit as part of a superintendent group of all the partner districts from the superintendents of all the CB Tech districts, and there's students that come in and talk about their experience. And every time, it doesn't matter who the kid is, every time I think, we've got some really smart kids, and smart in a way that's a much more global definition. They may not have the highest smarter balanced assessment score, or they may not have the highest GPA, but when they talk about the computer program that they just built and their future, so there's a much broader thing there that we've got to somehow capture it.
So this process will look at that stuff
Absolutely.
too. Okay.
So again, this would be a lot of focus this fall and winter, and then from there kind of come full circle back with you guys about then taking those recommendations for citing and pieces, and then that really would leave most of to really go through an adequate time. School design and development takes about a year, and so we would spend most of 2019 really doing all that based off whatever the results of all of this are. And then that would prep us and plan us for, again, bidding at that ideal market time that we talked about to be in early 2020. And school construction for high schools is typically in about that 20 to 24 month range, and so that's why it's got it's 18 months to be open in the fall of 22, which again is a 1 year difference from the original proposed plan. So it is aggressive, but I go back to that, one of those assumptions that I said from the beginning is that now's the time for us to do this, and now's the time for us to capture this momentum, the spirit, the tenacity that sits in our community. My recommendation for your next steps, I won't make you read those long bullets because they're in the 70-page memo I wrote to you. But tonight in our meeting that's going to start here in 9 minutes, is that...
We're going off that clock, 12 minutes.
Oh. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun. It's already 4 o'clock.
I thought we were coming back at 7.
No, we're continuing on.
I'm just gonna do it and go home.
It's going to be quick, though. There is, and I'm hoping, I'm going to be honest with you, I hope that you support this work enough that tonight that you take positive action on Resolution 2018-8, which would be the resolution that you've had an opportunity, I hope, to review that would set the public hearing. That is the next...
Should we do in this room on that, or we go to the high school?
That is, we have it slated to be at the high school for the legal requirements for it to be audio recorded and things. We would be in the high school again, so we just done all the work to get it there. So if you take action on that, we will move forward starting tomorrow to get that all scheduled, advertised, and everything. That is our next we would do our regular board meeting on August 9th in the high school again. There's the long explanation of what that is. This is the public hearing. And really the purpose of that would be to give twofold, is to give a much more consolidated version of the committee's recommendation, the administrative recommendation, and then allow for public comment about that. We also, between now and the 9th, are really hopeful that our community becomes really good consumers of the information, that both from our partners at the Columbia Basin Herald, our internal communications and things, is we've been very, attempted to be very transparent with all of this. And you'll notice sitting over there, Charles has one of these entire notebooks in his disposal for use, is we'd like people to chew on it, to think about it, to ask questions, to really get there. And I say that because I hope that our public hearing on the 9th is not just kicking shins and beating each other up for why this is the wrong idea. That they're well thought out articulations of the exciting future moving forward. After the 9th, you then, as soon as the meeting on the 23rd, you wouldn't have to do it on the 23rd, it could happen as soon as then, is you then could take action on really implementing these recommendations, to saying we're giving the endorsement moving forward in the change of the bond alterations that are outlined. So that's the kind of immediate next steps.
Between now and then, in order to not lose time, you guys can start to take action, do the research, and, so that we can hit the ground running. In other words, we're not kind of just dead in the water until August 23rd, right?
Well, we would be dead in the water if, when we walk out of here tonight, you give me the general feeling that you hate all this, and this is the biggest bunch of trash you've ever heard. But
even talking about how we market this, instead of saying changes, what can we use that says that I don't know what the word is, but instead of marketing that in a way that is negative, it says, with all of these people looking at this is the decision that helps the future of, I don't know, but think of some of this.
yeah, and that was our first stab at it, and granted, I'm excited to keep fleshing this out, from your guys' input too, is that what you're saying is exactly where Ken and I kind of did the work around this, is that these are our high schools for our future, building a better tomorrow. Because we have got to break away from the mold of being angry and distraught about everything, and that everything's the end of it, and get really excited about the opportunity for today's kids and tomorrow's. And if Christy were here, she'd be saying this, is she, this past year she went to a early childhood conference thing that she was at, and Christy by nature tends to be pretty cautious and careful about the next steps that she really takes there, and she was working with a lady who so very eloquently looked at her and said, well, Christy, how many kindergartners are you going to leave behind before you take action on them?
It kind of pushes you.
Yeah. And so I have to ask us the same question. So how many of our kids are we going to just say, we're going to keep fighting about this, and knowing that we have trends like this before we say, no, we're going to get to work right away on it. And we've been working on it. So it's not like this is a new, today all of a sudden this just arrived and we had a study session. But now's the time for us to really move forward. And I agree with you. And any ideas that you have around helping people to see the excitement behind it versus what's being done to everybody would be very helpful.
I think that was going on in 2004 that we only had a 53% graduation rate.
Is that when they changed?
I could give you a really sarcastic answer, but
But that was before.
I was hired in June 30th, 2004, so it was obviously me that changed the trend. So.
Right, good.
I don't know what 2004.
It's hard to really say.
It is.
Awkward. All of a sudden this just got awkward.
It just got awkward.
One of the things.
He hired me, that's my point.
See, and one of the things that we did when, with those 8th graders coming in as 9th graders, we put a lot of resources. Greg Cottrell was one of those people. And we said, we want those 9th graders to be there as sophomores and so on. And it kept, it was 2%, and then it got, and so we can do it.
And what's interesting about that, and I'm glad you bring that up, is it's not uncommon, and I would say probably the 2004 would be also the time. My guess is around that time, and the same in 2012, is there becomes an educational push to really try some things, to really kind of shake it up a little bit.
Yes.
And I can tell you without a doubt, 2012 was when we really, really started pushing the 9th grade failure, all those different things. And so it's interesting to look about, it's in all educational stuff, you see this, is there's that implementation dip, where initially you probably go backwards a little bit, and then you start to really see some results in growth of it. Unfortunately though, if that cycle continues, if you look at 2017 and 18, we're gonna go back on the downhill slide again, so.
Josh, I'm gonna adjourn our meeting, so we have 5-minute break, we can set it. Is everybody okay?
We want to be over here in left field.
Okay, we are just gonna reconvene, we've already, had our pledge of allegiance, and so with that, have you all had a chance to look over the minutes from our last meeting?
I move we
New
accept the
record
minutes from the
time.
previous meeting.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded from the people on the left. Approve these minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, have you had a chance to look over the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We approve the consent agenda as listed. Any, I guess there's no discussion? Any in favor, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay? Okay. Consent agenda has been passed. Okay, informational items. Cabinet report. Josh, I'm just going to go directly to you on this.
Yeah, I just want to draw your attention to one item that's on ours. Just a reminder that between now and our next regularly scheduled board meeting, you have your annual, it's kind of bad timing to remind you of this, just having been in here for 4 hours, but you have your annual board work session on August 1st. That is a very critical piece of our budget development process, and so we look forward to seeing you at 8 a.m. on the 1st.
And what's the time?
It's scheduled for 8 to 4. For those of you who've been through it before, you know that the budget process, especially this year with change of funding and the need for development of a 4-year budget and things, I anticipate it will be a long conversation for us. And it'll be in this room from 8 to 4. It's just a reminder of that. And that's the rest of my kind of stuff is not really all that critical.
And Josh, we will have breakfast and lunch for them.
Sylvia will have breakfast and lunch for you. So she says we, but I don't really have a part of that.
All right, either one.
As it stands.
Okay, great. Okay, Vicki, lunch report.
Nothing.
Okay, Citizens Directors Board, we don't have McKenna here today. We have, can I grab it for us? Let's bring that out. Okay, Larry Leaderport, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. I did not arrive until 3:30 today to the earlier meeting, but at 3:40 p.m. I noticed that Josh called for and brought up the question of needing to improve the science program at the high school. To me, this starts with having an adequate number of science lab classrooms, which is, I know, part of what Josh was referring to. My question would be, how do we teach lab science without enough lab science classrooms? The bulletin slide info that was presented shortly after that time, these are some of the items that I mentioned. The High School of the Future, the time frame for that was winter 2018 and 2019, a board level decision on site, etc. Early 2019, a school design and development. Number 3, early bid at ideal bid market time. And next, fall of 2022, opening of both high schools, the new and improved MLHS and the new high school. This gave me cause for question, in that the bond was passed in about March of 2017. And now we are looking at fall of 2022 for the opening of the new high school and the improvements to Moses Lake High School. How did we go from March of 2017 to fall of 2022 for opening of these facilities? My next item is in regards to the August 9th meeting for the public, next board meeting, where the recommendations of the Long Range Planning Facility Committee will be presented to the public, I take it. Will the public get information about the plans before August 9th? If the answer is no, how do we, the public, get input or give input that is both positive and informed? I think that this is a critical need that is linked to the necessity of an August 9th and an August 23rd. I'm not convinced that that's going to be enough meetings. I think that you're going to find that there is going to be a high turnout for August 9th and for August 23rd. People are going to be here with questions, and they're going to want to hear specific answers. Finally, in my opinion, the best way to improve education in Moses Lake School District is to implement the construction and work of the 2017 bond.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, old business. Josh, want to give us a quick update on those?
Sure, I'll just highlight a couple of them. We are making great progress with the safety and security upgrades. You will know that very soon the portable work will be happening. We are fortunate, I'm very happy to report to you that we were able to capitalize on state bids for that work of relocating the portable. So it actually saves some time and efficiency in getting that done. The other...
Did we get the land deals closed on everything okay?
Yes, today, it's actually the big day. I spent the morning, first of all, thanks to Eric for doing all the work and Stephanie for doing her part of it. I just got to go be the signer, but we today did close on all 3 of those transactions. So today was our deadline and it's all squared away. We have one little hiccup that's not from our end, but it's insignificant in the big scheme of things. So, but yes, those are all, the deeds will be recorded and they're all signed off on and payment delivered for those. So, yeah. Other than that, just we do have a couple of bid opening dates that have recently been revised that I want to make you aware of. I know some of you, I would encourage all of you, if you've never been to one, it is a very informative process. And so there was originally a bid opening scheduled for the Learning Services Building to be on the 25th, next Wednesday. It is delayed because of the pre-bid meeting included some new information from the city and some zoning and permitting things, but it's only delayed a week. So that meeting is now on August 2nd at the same time. And then August 2nd was originally supposed to be the bid opening for the high school facilities, and that is now pushed to August 8th. So scratch the 25th and the 2nd and replace them with the 2nd and the 8th for those bid openings. There's some legal requirements we have to follow when we make an adjustment, that you have to give so much notice to bidders to be able to alter their bids and other things. So,
What time was that on the 8th?
let me confirm it right now. I think they're both 5 o'clock, but let me confirm that. Oh, here it is. Yes, they're both 5 o'clock.
Here, okay.
Although I'm not sure that this facility has been confirmed yet because of the change of dates, but the 2nd would because it was already pre-reserved, but the 8th, let's leave that as location to be determined at this point because I'm not sure what that was a new date that was just added. It's actually been added since we've been here today working on this, so. I don't know. We may have to.
Park or something.
The old boardroom, I don't know. we have to check the availability first, so. And then, that's really all the significant progress on some of those, especially because you just had a meeting 6 days ago, so.
Okay, new business. Back to you, Josh, resolution 2018-8.
Sure. So this is a follow-up to the special meeting, you know, the long agenda we've had since noon today. In front of you is resolution 2018-8, requesting for you to authorize the conducting a public hearing on August 9th. A couple of things that I really want to clarify is first, the full resolution gives you all the definitions about the purpose of the public hearing. And again, the public hearing is to take comment about the changing conditions and the kind of the revised plan as recommended. And I want to reemphasize that you as a board have not taken any official action other than hearing the recommendations. And so before you can take action, you do have to conduct a public hearing. I will just say this, is that I know that it may seem, and Mr. Leopold shared in his previous comments about the amount of comment that we may be receiving, and I appreciate that. But I also, you've actually already conducted a public hearing back in January. And so this is kind of this is an additional step, an opportunity for public comment. And so my recommendation for you would be at this point to adopt resolution 2018-8 so that we can get that scheduled and confirmed for August 9th in conjunction with your regularly scheduled board meeting.
I move that we adopt resolution 2018-8.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt resolution 2018-8. Is there any further discussion?
Oh, yeah, discussion.
All right, okay, do a roll call vote. Elliot?
Yep.
Susan?
Yes.
Vicki?
Yes.
Vicki?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. A resolution 2018-8, conducting a public hearing scheduled for evening of August the 9th has been passed. Okay, I don't have it on here, but board comments, do you have anything? You had something?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to do some, go down and visit some of the summer school. And I gotta tell you, if you have, I don't know if it was again next week, Frontier.
It's still going.
Yeah, it was the 26th, I believe.
Yeah, so midweek next week it's done. Yeah.
I went into the math camp. Those kids were, I've never seen a number of 7th graders that were excited like they were. And they were doing math. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. And then I went into the robotics class, and they were learning how to code, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And that's how the kids were starting with their robotics and how they were learning. And they were excited. I mean, you just don't see that enthusiasm, and it was awesome. It really was awesome. So if you can get up to Frontier at all, it starts at 9 in the morning. And,
My grandson was in that
Is
band
it?
camp.
Oh, I didn't know who your kiddo was, but I would have taken a picture. The kids were so excited. And then I had the opportunity also to attend out at ATEC, what the Grant County Medical or Mental Health Department is sponsoring, talking about our social devices and what that's doing with our kiddos' minds. And it was really, really interesting. They had 2 speakers there. In one room were the parents, and in the other room were the kiddos. And there was a lot of parents, and they were very interested in what they can do, helping those kids not to be so attached to their phones or whatever they're using. It was absolutely wonderful. So there'll probably be some more of this going on too. I think the school district is working with Monica McAtee, and I'm not sure who else is on that, but we're going to be talking hopefully about that whole thing about our devices and what we can do, not only as parents, but helping some of our other neighbors. Some of that is pretty scary, what's happening in those kids' lives. Science is telling us that. So I think other than that.
You had mentioned self-evaluation for the board.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yeah. We had done, I hope everybody had put in their evaluation for our board, and we haven't had a chance to look at that.
So what, the plan for the first, so what I will, the August 1st date, we've targeted kind of 3 main agenda items. One is the budget, obviously.
Yeah.
The second is review of that self-evaluation, but I know everybody would like to preview it ahead of time. So I will get that out to you this week. I'll get it back from WASDA, the summary data. And the third is we intend to carve out some time for you to have time for discussion of the superintendent evaluation, so.
What? Say that with us. You look pretty happy. Are you afraid of us?
Well,
Did you get the results?
of my evaluation? No.
Okay.
Oh, the board self-study? No, I have not.
No, or yours?
Well, we get to do it.
On a similar note, I apologize for kind of re-interrupting the board comment section. I do want to, I failed to mention the second part of it by statement about the bid opening dates is just so you're aware, and Vicki would be aware of this because we've been down this road before, but procedurally what happens after a bid opening is that a contract with the lowest bidder is generated, and that contract requires either board approval or my signature. For the larger purchases, for the larger contracts, we bring them for board approval. So I just want to let you know that as part of that August 9th meeting, I would anticipate having in front of you for your approval, contract approval for those 2 bid openings, because the work can't actually start until we authorize the contract to move forward. So we will work on getting those to you ahead of time for your review, but obviously the turnaround between an August 8th bid opening and an August 9th contract approval that one may be pushed to the following meeting, but just look for those coming. So
Give me the time again on those bid opens.
they're both 5 o'clock.
5 here.
We think.
I would just like to say that I'm really excited about the openness to try to affect graduation requirements that are one size fits all. My graduation occurred before we had such a thing as Running Start, and I had to go to school for an entire year to take 1 class. And then when I went to college, I ended up going for 5 years because I had to work my way through. I mean, so, that last year, I could have graduated from college on time if I had that. But, it's just, we lose people. If I was not committed to finishing school, it would have been so easy for me to drop out rather than to go there every day for 1 class.
And that's exactly what we have to be working with the legislature with. That's an opportunity for us as a board.
Part of our high school.
Exciting.
Ellie?
Yeah, I went to the Advent conference for election. We missed a good call. We were the pilot program for the administration, so.
I don't think they can.
Would like to have been there. I was.
Yeah, I know you were. It was quite interesting. And I think they might try to have it at the WASDA conference in November for new people, so you know more, because there was a lot, like Dave and I were talking, there was a lot.
So give us your Cliff Notes version of what did you come away, what's your takeaways?
It's an awesome program.
Why?
Come on, don't put me on the spot.
You know what, the only thing, and Josh alluded to it during our other meeting, throwing me under the bus here, is the terminology, because Abbott says college ready, and that tends to make a hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I don't think all kids need to be college ready. They need to be, like what Josh said before, career college, life ready. And Abbott can do that for them. It's not just, it's just a terminology thing, and I think if Abbott kind of changes it a little bit, it'd be more open to more kids, because I think some kids, when they hear college, they tune out, because they don't think they can go to college.
And Dave, when did they begin tracking this? Grade schools, elementary?
No, the program started 40 years ago. They first started in high schools, then it went to, secondary schools, then it went to elementary, and now it has a higher ed component as well. And I will tell you, they have changed the verbiage now, because I'm a staff developer for those first-time principals and site coordinators in Abbott. The verbiage has changed. We asked them to identify the skill sets and the traits of either college or career-ready student. What are those? What's that skill set look like? And they are transferable, not two distinct concepts or conversations. So they have listened and changed that verbiage piece.
So I would be remiss if not jumping on this conversation a little bit. Number one, because I've got to give Elliot a hard time, but number two, I want to reemphasize something that Vicki just said. I'm sorry. The session that we had an opportunity to attend, and unfortunately, I know you guys were under the weather, but I think there'll be lots of opportunities in the future. Avid has always done a great job of professional development for teachers and administrators, but one of the places that has kind of been a missing piece, if you will, is somewhere to plug in kind of district office staff and school board members. And so this was the inaugural, we were their test pilot for doing it, and it was very cool. And I also need to give credit where credit is due. Dave is a voice for advocacy for us, and so I don't think it's by accident that session happened in Seattle at the first summer institute that was ever conducted in Seattle. I think it was a day well worth it. To be honest with you, I think it probably could have been 2 days, because one of the places where, and this is typical Avid, they just dove right in, and I think there was a lot of foundational knowledge that would have been helpful for the board to have, the board members that were there to have before they just started talking. So the second part of that's the hard time for Elliot is definitely one of the highlights of Avid Summer Institutes is the student speakers that talk about their experience. And these are most often recent Avid graduates from high schools, and they're always local people to the area where you're at. And so this, for the first time, we had 2 Washington students, one from Richland High School and one from Foster High School in Tukwila.
Yeah, I was going to say Frank was Foster.
Both of which are awesome graduates heading to WSU.
I knew that was going to come.
I was certain, especially the young lady graduating from Foster High School, that she was going to say, I'm going to UW, but she made a better choice, and so I'm really happy for her.
I will be adjourned.
We're adjourned.